Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Cryptic Corpse. I am your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Now find your cozy spot and relax. I still remember the smell that hit me when I first stepped off the bus in Timber Hollow after 10 years away. Wet pine, sawdust, and something else. Something rotten underneath it all. The kind of smell that warns you to turn around and leave. I wish I had listened. My name is Matthew Harkins, and I came back to investigate my brother's death. The official story was that Robert died in an accident at the lumber mill, crushed by falling logs. But the letter he sent me a week before he died told a different story. "Something's wrong in the forest, Matt," he wrote. "Something's watching us. If anything happens to me, don't trust what they tell you." The town looked smaller than I remembered. The main street was lined with empty shops, their windows dusty and dark. Only the diner showed signs of life, its neon open sign buzzing in the afternoon gloom. A few worn-out trucks were parked outside, their beds filled with chainsaw equipment. And safety gear. "Matt Harkins, is that you?" A woman stepped out from behind the diner counter, wiping her hands on a stained apron. Her face was familiar, but I couldn't place it until she smiled. "It's Evelyn Miller." Evelyn, wow. We'd dated briefly in high school. She looked older now, tired lines around her eyes, but her smile was the same. It's been a long time. 10 years. She poured coffee without asking if I wanted some. "I heard about Robert. I'm sorry." I nodded, throat suddenly tight. "That's why I'm back. Something doesn't feel right about his death." Evelyn's face changed, her smile dropping away. "Robert changed in the last few months. Started talking crazy about the old growth forest, about things watching from the trees." "What kind of things?" She lowered her voice, even though the diner was nearly empty. "He'd come in here late, after his security shifts at the mill. Said he heard voices out there, said he found footprints too big to be human." A chill ran down my spine, despite the warmth of the diner. Did anyone believe him? This town needs the mill, Matt. Ajax Lumber saved us when the old company went under. Nobody wants to hear about anything that might threaten that. After finishing my coffee, I picked up the keys to Robert's cabin from the realtor. The drive there took me along roads that cut deeper into the forest than I remembered. New logging. Roads branched off in all directions, raw wounds in the green canopy. Robert's cabin sat at the end of a narrow dirt road, surrounded by tall pines. It looked normal from the outside, but inside was a different story. The windows were reinforced, with metal bars, extra locks on every door, and the walls, covered in my brother's handwriting, maps and strange symbols. "What happened to you, Rob?" I whispered, running my fingers over his frantic scribbles. "What did you find out here?" His journal was sitting on the kitchen table, like he'd left it there for me to find. I opened it and started reading. Day 37. Found more footprints today, bigger than before, 18 inches at least. They're watching the cutting crews. I can feel their eyes on us. Day 42. 3 men missing from the North Camp. Company says they quit, but their gear is still in their bunks. Found strange markings on the trees near where they disappeared. Symbols I've never seen before. Day 50. Figured out how to record them, set up equipment in grid pattern. Got something, not animal, not human. The sounds, God help me, the sounds they make. I put the journal down, my hands shaking. Next to it was a map marked with red X's. Missing workers, strange sightings, and something labeled boundary stones. That night I couldn't sleep. The forest around the cabin was too quiet. No crickets, no owls, nothing. Just dead silence pressing against the windows like something solid. And somewhere, far off in the darkness, I heard what might have been a tree falling or something moving through the forest that shouldn't be there at all. The Ajax lumber mill dominated the east side of town, a massive operation that hummed day and night. The next morning I drove there to speak with Richard Vaughan, the foreman who'd been my brother's boss. Robert was a good security man, Vaughan said, not looking up from his paperwork. But he started imagining things, stress of the job maybe, or something else. He glanced at me. Some men can't handle the deep forest. Makes them see things that aren't there. Like what? I asked. Like whatever crazy idea got into your brother's head. Bigfoot, forest spirits, who knows? All I know is he was supposed to be patrolling the East Ridge that night, but we found him 2 miles away, under those logs. He shook his head. Shame, but it was an accident. I didn't believe him. Something in his eyes told me he was hiding something. After leaving the mill, I decided to check some of the locations marked on Robert's map. The closest was labeled Recording Site Number 3, about a mile into the forest. The hike took me through old-growth trees so tall they blocked out the sun. The forest floor was soft under my boots, moss-covered and ancient. I noticed something strange as I walked. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. No birds called, no squirrels rustled in the branches, just silence. At the coordinates from the map, I found a small metal case hidden in a hollow tree. Inside was one of Robert's recording devices, still working. I rewound the tape and pressed play. At first, there was nothing. Then a deep rumbling sound that made my skin crawl. It wasn't animal, wasn't human. It was like someone had taken a human voice and stretched it, distorted it. The hair on my arms stood up as I listened to a pattern that sounded almost like speech. And then a heavy, rhythmic thudding, footsteps, but they couldn't be. Each step was too far apart, too heavy. Whatever made those sounds was huge. I took the recorder and hurried back toward the road, feeling watched the entire way. Just before I reached my car, I spotted something that made me freeze. A boundary marker, a stone pillar with carvings, just like in Robert's journal. And beyond it, fresh tire tracks from logging equipment crossing what was clearly meant to be a line that shouldn't be crossed. That night at the diner, I found Joseph Blackhawk, an elder from the local tribe who worked as a cook. When everyone else had left, I showed him the recordings. His face went ashen as he listened. "Your brother knew," he said quietly. "He was trying to warn people." Warn them about what? The tall ones, the guardians. Joseph's eyes were serious. "My people have always known to respect the boundary markers. The deepest parts of the forest belong to them, not us. But this new company, they don't care about old ways." "You're talking about Bigfoot?" I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. "Not like the stories you know. These are not animals. They protect the old growth. They are connected to it, and now they're angry." That night, the storm came. Rain lashed against the cabin windows, as wind howled through the trees. But there was something wrong about it. The way it focused on the town, the way trees fell precisely across every road leading out. By morning, Timber Hollow was cut off completely, and 3 more workers had vanished from the farthest logging camp. The town meeting was chaos. Families of the missing men shouted questions that nobody could answer. Richard Vaughan tried to calm everyone down, promising help was coming once the roads were cleared. "This isn't a normal storm," I said, standing up. The room went quiet. "Look at how the trees fell. Only on the roads, nowhere else. Something doesn't want us leaving." "Harkins is crazy, just like his brother," someone called out. "His brother was right," I shot back. "There's something in these woods, something protecting the forest from us." Vaughan's face hardened. "That's enough. We don't need panic based on superstition." After the meeting, Evelyn pulled me aside. "There's something you should see," she whispered. "At the old Miller Creek site. Be careful, Ajax security patrols there now, even though it's supposed to be off limits." The next day, I hiked to Miller Creek, staying hidden among the trees. What I found made my blood run cold. The entire area had changed. Trees that should have taken decades to grow had shot up overnight, forming a wall around the creek. Fungi of colors I'd never seen before covered the ground, and carved into every tree trunk was the same symbol from Robert's journal. As I took pictures, a twig snapped behind me. I spun around and came face to face with it. 9 feet tall, at least, standing on 2 legs, its body covered in dark hair, but not like an animal's fur, more like a cloak that shifted and changed as I watched. Its face was almost human, with deep-set eyes that reflected a terrible intelligence. It could have crushed me in an instant, but instead, it just watched me. Then the strangest thing happened. It reached out and touched a small sapling. Before my eyes, the sapling grew, twisting upward until it was a full-sized tree. The creature looked back at me, as if making sure I understood what I'd seen. A voice filled my head, though its mouth never moved. Your brother knew. He tried to help. They killed him for it. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Fear had frozen me in place. The forest dies. We die. Then you die. All connected. The voice was like thunder inside my skull. They take what is not theirs to take. Somewhere nearby, an engine roared to life. The creature's head snapped toward the sound, and in a movement too fast to follow, it vanished into the trees. I stumbled back to my car, my whole understanding of the world shattered. These weren't animals. They weren't myths or legends. They were guardians, just as Joseph had said, and they were at war with us. When I got back to the cabin, I found it ransacked. All of Robert's journals were gone, along with his recordings. Someone had been there, someone who knew what I was discovering. That night, Thomas Gardner's body was found at the edge of town. The official story was that he'd been mauled by a bear, but I snuck into the clinic where they were keeping him. The wounds weren't from any bear. They were precise, surgical. Organs removed with careful intent, not savage hunger. Whatever was in the forest, it was sending a message. The next morning, a fleet of black SUVs rolled into town. Men in suits, who claimed to be from the Forest Service, but carried themselves like military. Their leader introduced himself as Marcus Williams, CEO of Ajax Lumber. "We're here to resolve the situation," he announced to the frightened townspeople. "The roads will be cleared within 48 hours, and we'll find the animal that killed Thomas Gardner." But I knew better now. At night, I broke into the Ajax temporary headquarters set up in the town hall. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Maps of the forest with areas marked for specimen collection, photos of captured creatures, some alive in cages, some dissected on tables, and a document outlining Project Guardian, a government-backed effort to study the creature's biology for military applications. They knew, they'd always known. The logging operation wasn't just for timber, it was to flush out the Guardians, to capture them. When I returned to my cabin, Joseph was waiting for me. "They're coming for you next," he said. "You know too much." "What exactly are these creatures?" I asked. "How can they make trees grow like that?" "They're not separate from the forest. They are the forest given form," Joseph explained. "The oldest trees contain a fungal network that connects everything. The Guardians are its protectors, its immune system. When Ajax began cutting the old growth, they threatened the network itself. And my brother? He discovered the truth, started communicating with them. That's why they killed him." A noise outside made us both freeze. Through the window, I saw men with flashlights surrounding the cabin. "There's another way out," Joseph said, moving to the fireplace. He pressed something, and a hidden door opened in the back wall. "Your family has protected the forest for generations. Matthew, that's why you were drawn back here. That's why the Guardians showed themselves to you. We escaped through a tunnel that led deep into the woods, emerging near the boundary stones. The forest beyond was different, older, more primal. The trees seemed to move even without wind, watching us pass. In a clearing stood the largest tree I'd ever seen, its trunk wider than a house. At its base was an opening. The heart of the network, Joseph said. If you truly want to help, if you want to know what your brother knew, you must enter. I hesitated only a moment before ducking inside. The interior was hollow, the walls glowing, with bioluminescent fungi. In the center stood one of the guardians, taller than the one I'd seen before, its eyes ancient and knowing. It didn't speak with words this time. Instead, it showed me. Visions flooded my mind. The forest as it had been for thousands of years. The guardians emerging from the oldest trees, manifesting from the forest's collective consciousness. My ancestors making a pact with them, promising to protect the boundaries. And Ajax's true purpose, harvesting the guardians' biological material to create super soldiers who could control plant growth, heal instantly, and connect minds across distances. Then I saw Robert. He hadn't died in an accident. He'd been executed by Ajax security when he threatened to expose their operation. His last act was to hide his most important evidence I now needed to find. When the visions ended, I was on my knees, gasping. "What do I do?" I asked. "Become what your brother became," the Guardian answered in my mind. "A bridge between worlds." It placed a hand on my shoulder, and pain shot through me as something inside me changed. I could suddenly feel the forest, every tree, every plant, all connected in a vast living network. And I could feel the others watching through the trees, waiting. "They come," the Guardian said. "They burn." In the distance, I saw the glow of flames. Ajax had decided to burn the forest rather than let its secrets escape. I raced back toward town as the forest behind me erupted in flames. But something was wrong. The fire moved unnaturally, contained in a perfect circle despite the wind. The Guardians were controlling it. At the edge of town, I found chaos. The Forest Service men were loading equipment onto trucks, preparing to leave. Among them was Richard Vaughan, arguing with Marcus Williams. "We had a deal," Vaughan shouted. "You said nobody else would die." "The situation has escalated," Williams replied coldly. "We're implementing final containment protocols." I stayed hidden, watching as they loaded what looked like metal cages onto the trucks. Inside one, I caught a glimpse of dark fur and moving shapes. They had captured some of the Guardians. Following at a distance, I tracked the convoy to the old mining entrance at the edge of town. They were taking their prisoners underground. I waited until the guards changed shifts, then slipped inside. The old mine had been transformed into a high-tech facility. In chambers carved from rock, scientists in white coats worked over tables where Guardians lay strapped down. The creatures' chests were cut open, samples being taken from their still-living bodies. In one room, I found something worse. A Guardian, whose body had been fused with mechanical parts, metal implants replacing limbs, wires running into its skull. Its eyes were wild, filled with pain and rage. As I watched in horror, an alarm blared through the facility. On monitors around the room, I saw impossible images, trees uprooting themselves outside, moving toward the town. The forest itself was rising. Using the distraction, I began freeing the captured Guardians, breaking their restraints. They were weak, but still alive. Matthew Harkins. The voice came from behind me. Marcus Williams stood in the doorway, a gun in his hand. "I knew your brother. Smart man. He could have been part of something world-changing if he hadn't been so sentimental." "You murdered him," I said. "We offered him a place with us first. These creatures aren't just animals, they're the next step in human evolution. Imagine soldiers who can heal any wound, communicate without technology, control their environment." He gestured to the modified Guardian. "This is just the beginning." "They're not weapons," I said. "They're Guardians, part of something bigger than you can understand." "That's exactly what your brother said." Williams smiled, right before I put a bullet in his head. He raised his gun, but before he could fire, the modified Guardian broke free of its restraints with a roar that shook the room. It moved with unnatural speed, mechanical limbs whirring as it seized Williams and pinned him to the wall. "Run!" it growled, its voice a horrible mixture of electronic and organic sounds. "To the heart, now!" I didn't question it. I fled from the facility as chaos erupted behind me, Guardians breaking free, the hybrid creature tearing through anyone in its path. But it wasn't just attacking humans. It went after the other Guardians too, driven mad by what had been done to it. Above ground, the scene was apocalyptic. Trees had formed a wall around the town, moving closer by the minute. The few remaining. Townspeople were gathered in the square, terrified, as Evelyn tried to organize an evacuation. "Matt! What's happening?" she called when she saw me. "The forest is fighting back," I said. "Everyone needs to get to the highway, now." "What about you?" I looked toward the distant shape of the mother tree, visible now even from town. "I have to finish this." The journey back to the heart tree was strange. The forest parted for me, trees bending aside to let me pass. I could feel the network reaching out, recognizing me as one of its own now. At the heart tree, Joseph waited, with the tallest of the Guardians. "The Ajax people are trying to escape with their research," I told them. "And there's one Guardian they changed, part machine now. It's killing everything." "The balance is broken," the Guardian's voice echoed in my mind. "Only one way to restore it." "What do I need to do?" The Guardian pointed to the opening in the tree. "Complete the connection. Become the bridge." I understood then. My brother had started this process, becoming partly connected to the forest network. But he had been killed before he could complete it. Now the forest needed a human consciousness to help it fight back, to understand the human threat and counter it. "Will I still be me?" I asked. Joseph placed a hand on my shoulder. "Yes and no. You will be more than you are now." Inside the heart tree, the air was thick with spores that glowed blue in the darkness. I walked to the center, where a pool of amber liquid bubbled. The Guardian followed, extending its hand toward the pool. "Your choice," it said. I thought of Robert, of his final warnings, of the forest that had been my childhood home, of the evil men who would tear it apart for power and profit. I plunged my hands into the pool. The transformation was immediate and overwhelming. My consciousness expanded outward, connecting to every tree, every plant in the forest. I could feel the other Guardians, sense their thoughts and movements. And I could feel the hybrid creature, its mind a twisted tangle of rage and pain. Through the network, I reached out to it, showed it the truth of what it was, what it had been before Ajax corrupted it. For a moment, its mind cleared, and it understood. Then, with a final act of defiance against its creators, it destroyed the Ajax facility, burying their research under tons of rock. As for Marcus Williams and his remaining men, they found themselves lost in a forest that shifted and changed around them, never leading them to the same place twice. The trees would keep them trapped until they could be judged. When I finally emerged from the heart tree, I was changed, not just in mind, but in body. My skin had taken on the texture of bark in places. My eyes, when I glimpsed them in the pool's reflection, had the ancient depth of the Guardians. "What happens now?" Joseph asked. "Now we rebuild," I said, my voice resonating with a new power. "We establish the boundaries again, and we teach the people how to live with the forest, not against it." 10 years later, Timber Hollow is a different place. The Ajax Corporation is gone, their records of the Guardians buried with their facility. The town has become a sanctuary of sorts, a place where the forest is respected and protected. I still look human, mostly, though I don't venture into cities anymore. The children of the town know me as the Forest Man, the one who walks between worlds. They bring me news, and I teach them the old ways, the true ways. Sometimes deep in the woods, families on hiking trips catch glimpses of the guardians. They tell stories when they return to town, but no one comes hunting them anymore. The boundaries are respected now. At night, I return to the heart tree, connecting fully with the network, sharing what I've learned with the forest mind. The guardians gather around me, no longer afraid or angry. We are sentinels now, watching over the delicate balance between human and forest life. And somewhere in the tangled roots beneath us, in the oldest part of the network, I sometimes feel my brother's consciousness, preserved in the forest memory. Not gone, just transformed. As I have been transformed, as we all must be, if we're to survive what's coming next. The thing about drowning is that it's silent. There are no screams, no splashing, just the quiet slip beneath the surface. That's what the sheriff told me when they found my husband's body floating face down in Lake Michigan. An accident, they said. But I knew better. The water had taken him, just like it would try to take my daughter. My name is Eleanor Walsh. I'm a marine biologist and now a widow raising my 15-year-old daughter Abigail alone. After David's death, I couldn't stand our empty home in Chicago anymore. Every dripping faucet reminded me of the water that stole him away. So when I inherited my family's old cabin on Lake Midnight in northern Minnesota, it seemed like the perfect escape. "Mom, how much longer?" Abigail asked from the passenger seat, her eyes barely lifting from her phone. She'd hardly spoken since the funeral. "Just a few more miles, sweetie. You're going to love it here, I promise." I didn't tell her that I'd never actually been to the cabin myself. My parents always avoided it after Uncle Thomas disappeared while fishing there in 1954. Family whispers said the lake took him, but I'd always chalked it up to drowning and grief-talking. Now I wasn't so sure. When we finally pulled up the long pine-bordered driveway, I felt a strange mix of dread and homecoming. The cabin sat on a bluff overlooking Lake Midnight, which stretched out black and still like spilled ink. The trees around it were dense and dark, barely moving in the breeze. "This place looks ancient," Abigail muttered, but I could see curiosity flickering in her eyes. "It was built by your great-grandfather in the 1920s, I explained. "No one's been here since Uncle Thomas disappeared. I expected cobwebs, dust, maybe even structural damage after so many decades. But when I turned the old iron key in the lock and pushed open the heavy wooden door, I felt a cold prickle run up my spine. The cabin was immaculate, no dust, no decay. It looked like someone had cleaned it yesterday." "Mom?" Abigail's voice had a tremor in it now. "I thought you said nobody's been here since the 50s. I ran my finger along a bookshelf. Not a speck of dust. The floor was solid, no warping. The windows were intact and strangely reinforced. "Maybe the lawyer hired someone to clean before we arrived," I said, not believing it myself. That night, as I unpacked my research equipment, I noticed strange modifications throughout the cabin. Rubber seals around all the doors, waterproof, caulking along the baseboards, metal shutters that could seal the windows tight. Why would a lakeside cabin need to be so watertight? The next morning, I met our only neighbor, Harrison Mills. He appeared at our dock as I was setting up my water testing equipment, a grizzled man with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to see right through me. "You're Thomas's niece," he said. "Not a question. I am. Eleanor Walsh. My daughter Abigail and I are living here now." "You shouldn't." His voice was flat. "Lake's got a hunger to it, especially for your bloodline." I laughed nervously. "I'm a marine biologist. I've come to study the lake's ecosystem." His eyes narrowed. "You think science will protect you? That water knows who you are, Dr. Walsh. It's been waiting." I watched him shuffle back through the woods to his own small cabin, dismissing him as a superstitious old man. But his words settled in my stomach like stones. That afternoon, I collected my first samples. Lake Midnight was unusual, eerily clear in some places, impenetrably black in others. My preliminary tests showed abnormal mineral content and organisms I couldn't immediately identify. When I pulled up my collection net, I found specimens that made no sense. A freshwater crayfish nearly 12 inches long, a tadpole with what appeared to be small jointed limbs, a fish with a dorsal fin pattern I'd never seen documented. Evolution doesn't work this fast, I whispered to myself, examining the strange creatures. As the sun set, painting the lake blood red, I heard Abigail calling from the shore. "Mom, come look at this!" She was crouched beneath our small dock, pointing at the wooden pillars. I knelt beside her and felt my blood run cold. Carved into the underside of every post were intricate images. Humanoid figures emerging from stylized waves, their limbs elongated and webbed, their heads elongated. The carvings had been worn smooth by water, but they were unmistakable and very, very old. Cool, right? Abigail smiled. Like lake monsters or something. That night I awoke at exactly midnight to the sound of footsteps. I found Abigail sleepwalking. Across the living room, her hand outstretched toward the front door. "Abby?" I touched her shoulder. Her eyes snapped open, confused. "Mom? What's happening?" "You were sleepwalking, honey, toward the lake." "I was dreaming about water," she whispered. "It was calling my name." The next day, I visited the local bait shop for supplies. The owner, Frank Townsend, was hanging fishing lures when I walked in. "Dr. Walsh, heard we had a scientist move into the old cabin." He smiled warmly. "What brings you to our little lake?" "Research, mainly. The ecosystem here is unusual." Frank's smile dimmed. "Found that out already, huh? Lake Midnight's got its quirks. Have you noticed anything strange about the wildlife?" He hesitated. "Strange how?" "Abnormal growth patterns, unusual adaptations." Frank stared at me for a long moment. "There's stories about this lake, old stories. The Ojibwe called it the Black Mirror, said it reflected more than just your face." He lowered his voice. "Folks around here talk about water shadows, things that come up from the lake wearing the faces of the drowned." I tried to laugh it off. "Local legends are fascinating, but I'm more interested in the science." "Science?" He nodded slowly. "Well, you might want to check your depth readings regularly. Lake changes. Lakes don't change depth without cause, Mr. Townsend. This one does." That evening, I set up my sonar equipment and took depth measurements of the lake. According to geological surveys, Lake Midnight's deepest point should be around 120 feet. My readings showed 372 feet. Impossible. The next morning, I took new readings from the exact same spot, 189 feet. Equipment malfunction, I told myself, but I knew better. My equipment was state-of-the-art. On our 7th night at the cabin, storm rolled in. Rain lashed against the windows as thunder shook the walls. Abigail and I huddled by the fireplace, playing cards to distract ourselves. At midnight exactly, the electricity failed. In the sudden darkness, I felt rather than heard something change. The grandfather clock in the corner began to tick backward. "Mom?" Abigail's voice was small. I fumbled for my phone flashlight. In its beam, I could see the second hand of the old clock spinning counterclockwise. For exactly 60 seconds it ran backward, then stopped completely. Lightning flashed, illuminating the lake through the window. And in that instant, both Abigail and I saw them, massive serpentine shapes moving beneath the surface, their bodies twisting in impossible configurations. "You saw that, right?" Abigail whispered. I couldn't lie to her. "Yes, I saw it." That night, Abigail crawled into my bed like she hadn't done since she was small. As she slept, I noticed something between her fingers, thin, translucent webbing that hadn't been there before. By morning, it was gone. When Wildlife Officer Nathan Prescott arrived the following week, I almost cried with relief. Finally, someone official to validate what I was seeing. We've received reports of unusual animal behavior in the area, he explained, sitting at my kitchen table. Mass migrations away from the lake. It's not season appropriate. The animals are fleeing, I said, pushing my research notes toward him. And I think I know why. I showed him my samples, the bizarre creatures that defied classification, the water tests showing compounds that shouldn't exist in nature, the depth readings that changed daily. Nathan frowned at my data. I've worked these lakes for 15 years, Dr. Walsh. I've never seen anything like this. Will you help me investigate further? I need someone to verify what I'm finding. He agreed to stay for a few days. That afternoon, we took the small rowboat out to collect deeper samples. As I lowered my collection tubes into the black water, Nathan suddenly grabbed my arm. Look down, he whispered. The water was clear for at least 30 feet. Below us, I could make out shapes, straight lines and perfect angles that had no place in a natural lake bed. Are those structures? I breathed. They look man-made, Nathan said, but that's impossible at this depth without equipment. We rowed to another spot. The structures were gone, back again an hour later from a slightly different angle, and there they were, even more distinct. They're only visible from certain positions, I realized, as if they're hiding. That night, after Nathan retired to the guest room, I found Abigail sitting on the dock, her feet dangling in the water. The moon was full, casting a silver pathway across the lake's surface. Abby, it's freezing out here. Come inside. She didn't look up. The water's warm, Mum. Feel it. I touched the lake's surface. It was bathwater warm, despite the cool autumn air. Have you been talking to it? She asked, her voice dreamy. Talking to what, honey? The lake. It talks to me when I sleep, shows me things. I pulled her feet from the water and led her inside, heart pounding. The webbing between her fingers had returned, more pronounced now. The next day, while Abigail napped, I drove into town to search the local historical society's archives. The librarian helped me find old newspapers dating back to the 1800s. What I discovered made my hands shake. Every 23 years, like clockwork, Lake Midnight saw a spike in disappearances. Fishermen, swimmers, children playing at the shore, always in groups of 3 or 7, always during the autumn. This year marked 23 years since the last cycle. When I returned to the cabin, Harrison Mills was waiting on my porch. Found the pattern, didn't you? He asked. How did you know? He gestured for me to follow him. We walked through the woods to his property, a small cabin surrounded by what looked like junkyard debris. But as we got closer, I realized it wasn't junk. It was a barrier, metal spikes driven into the ground, strange symbols carved into wood and stone, bottles filled with cloudy liquid hanging from trees. Been fighting them since '54, he said. Since they took my family. Who took your family? Not who, what? He led me inside and pulled out a battered metal lockbox from under his bed. Inside were dozens of journals, photographs, and hand-drawn diagrams. My father was a biologist too, he explained. Started noticing changes in the lake creatures back in the 30s. By the time he understood what was happening, it was too late. The photographs showed what looked like autopsies of lake creatures. Fish with rudimentary hands, frogs with too many eyes, something that resembled a small, deformed human fetus. They're evolving, I whispered. Being evolved, Harrison corrected. Directed, changed. The lake is a tool. When I returned to my cabin at dusk, Nathan was preparing to dive. He'd brought scuba gear to explore the underwater structures. I wouldn't, I told him, showing him Harrison's photos. All the more reason to document this, he insisted. If something's affecting the ecosystem this dramatically, we need evidence. I couldn't talk him out of it. I watched from the dock as his bubbles moved farther from shore, then eventually disappeared. He never resurfaced. The next morning, I found his diving gear arranged in a perfect circle on the shore. His tanks were full, his wetsuit was dry, his fins were positioned pointing toward the lake like an arrow. When I reported his disappearance, the local police seemed unsurprised. The sheriff gave the lake a long look and simply said, "Lake claims, 1 or 2 every year, usually outsiders who don't know its moods." That night Abigail spoke in her sleep. At first, I thought it was gibberish, until I recognized some of the sounds from recordings I'd once studied of extinct Native American languages. I set up my phone to record her. In the morning, I played it back and felt ice form in my veins. Mixed with the unknown language were English phrases. The deep ones are waking. The change comes with the blood moon. Mother must join us or lose me forever. The webbing between Abigail's fingers no longer disappeared during the day. When I asked her about it, she seemed confused, as if she couldn't see it. "Mom, I had that dream again," she said over breakfast. "The one where I can breathe underwater. The lake people showed me their city. It's beautiful down there, all light and movement." I tried to keep my voice steady. "What do these lake people look like, Abby?" She tilted her head, considering. "Like dogs that learn to walk like men, but not scary. They've been waiting for me." I spent the night researching cryptids and folklore surrounding lakes in the region. By dawn, I had connected the pieces. The description Abigail gave matched legends of the dogmen, upright, canine bipedal creatures from Native American lore. But these weren't just myths. The creatures in Lake Midnight were real, and they were using the lake's unusual mineral composition to evolve rapidly. My tests showed concentrated levels of rare earth elements and compounds that could potentially accelerate genetic mutation. As I worked, Abigail slept longer and longer, only waking for a few hours each day. Her skin had developed a faint bluish tint. The webbing now extended halfway up her fingers. "Mom," she said when she finally emerged from her bedroom, "the lake people say I'm almost ready." "Ready for what, Abby?" "To go home." She said it so simply, like she was talking about a trip to the store. "This is your home," I insisted. She smiled sadly. "No, I've always belonged to the water. They told me Dad knew too much. That's why they had to call him into the lake." My blood ran cold. "Are you saying they killed your father?" "They didn't think of it as killing, just reclaiming what would prevent me from returning." I grabbed her shoulders. "Abigail, listen to me. These creatures are doing something to you. They're changing you. I know, Mom, it's wonderful." That afternoon, as I sat on the dock trying to think, I noticed something floating near the shore. At first, I thought it was driftwood. Then I saw the pale flesh, the tattered diving suit. Nathan had returned, or what was left of him. I waded into the water to pull him ashore. His body was bloated but wrong. Gills had formed along his neck, still pulsing weakly. His feet had fused into fin-like appendages. His eyes were huge, black and still moving. "Eleanor," his voice was a gurgle. "They're incredible. Living underwater. Centuries. Nathan, what happened to you?" "Evolution, speeding up. They need new blood." He died or completed his transformation right there on the shore. His body seemed to deflate, turn liquid and flow back into the lake before I could even process what was happening. I ran to Harrison's cabin, pounding. On his door, he answered with a shotgun in hand, relaxing only slightly when he saw me. "They took the wildlife officer," I gasped. "And they're changing my daughter." Harrison nodded grimly. "Moon's almost full. They'll be making their move soon." "What move? What do they want?" He led me to a hidden cellar beneath his cabin. Down a ladder was a room lined with metal, filled with research equipment that looked decades old, but still operational. "My father's work," he explained, "and mine." The walls were covered with maps showing underwater sonar readings of Lake Midnight, revealing an enormous structure beneath the surface, like an underwater city. "The Dogmen didn't build this," Harrison said. "They were created by it. They were humans once, residents of this area who went into the lake voluntarily. Why would anyone do that? Because the lake promises evolution, advancement, power. He showed me yellowed photographs of town residents from the 1930s, standing at the lake's edge in white robes. My grandparents were among the first to go. My parents refused. Then in '54, the lake took my sister anyway. My parents went in after her. His voice cracked. I was away at college. I studied the sonar images. This structure, it's massive and growing. Every 23 years, they take more people, incorporate more knowledge, expand their territory. A nagging thought finally clicked into place. The lake level, it's been rising since we arrived. There hasn't been enough rain to explain it. Harrison nodded grimly. They're cutting off escape routes. When I returned to the cabin, I found Abigail standing in the kitchen, perfectly still, water dripping from her clothes. I can breathe underwater now, she said matter-of-factly. All the way. To the bottom. They showed me everything. Who are they, Abby? The dogmen. They were the first to return to the water, but they need us now. They need our minds. I tried to touch her, but she flinched away. Her eyes had changed. The pupils elongated into vertical slits. They're not just animals living in the lake, she continued. They are the lake. All the water is connected, one mind spread across millions of bodies, and they can reshape anything the water touches. As if to demonstrate, she dipped her finger in a glass of water on the counter. The water rose up, forming a perfect sphere that hovered in the air. How are you doing that? I whispered. I'm not. They are. Through me. That night I tried to call for help, but all communications were down. I drove to the main road, only to find it flooded. The water level had risen nearly 5 feet, cutting us off. When I returned, there was a government SUV parked outside my cabin. Inside, a team of people in hazmat suits were setting up equipment. A man in a suit approached me, flashing credentials. Dr. Eleanor Walsh. I'm Dr. William Harlow, Department of Advanced Research Projects. We've been monitoring your findings with great interest. How did you even know what I've been working on? He smiled thinly. We've been studying Lake Midnight for decades. Your water samples were automatically flagged in the national database. Then, you know about the creatures? The dogmen are just the surface manifestation. What lives in the lake is much older, much more complex. He explained that the government had known about Lake Midnight since the 1940s. They'd been observing the evolutionary acceleration, hoping to harness it for military applications. Imagine soldiers who could adapt to any environment in minutes instead of generations, Dr. Harlow said, his eyes gleaming. Weapons that could restructure themselves based on the enemy's response. You're insane, I breathed. These creatures are dangerous. They killed my husband. They're changing my daughter. Change isn't always bad, Dr. Walsh. As he spoke, I noticed something off about his movements. His hands were slightly webbed. When he turned to give orders to his team, I caught a glimpse of what looked like gills just below his collar. You're one of them, I realized. His smile widened, revealing teeth that were just a bit too sharp. I'm transitional, a bridge between worlds. What do they want with my daughter? Your family line has always been special to them, more adaptable. The Walsh bloodline carries genetic markers that make the transition smoother, more complete. Outside, thunder cracked as rain began to pour down. The lake's water rose visibly, creeping up the lawn toward the cabin. Dr. Harlow continued calmly. They've been consuming the lake's minerals for centuries, using them to fuel their evolution. But now they need genetic diversity, new minds. Your daughter is particularly valuable because of her youth. Her brain is still developing, perfect for adaptation. While he spoke, I noticed one of his team members open a case containing syringes, filled with cloudy blue liquid. What is that? I demanded. Accelerant. We've refined the lake water to speed the transformation process. Your daughter is changing too slowly. We're going to help her complete the transition. I lunged for the door, but two team members grabbed me. As they held me, Dr. Harlow rolled up his sleeve, revealing an arm mottled with scales and webbing. "We've learned to exist partly on land," he explained, "but only for short periods. The next phase requires full integration with the water system. Lake Midnight is just the beginning. There are aquifers connecting this water to supplies across the state." With horror, I realized their plan to spread whatever was in Lake Midnight to water sources everywhere. Suddenly, the cabin windows imploded as a massive wave crashed through. Water rushed in, knocking everyone off their feet. In the chaos, I broke free and ran to find Abigail. She was standing on the dock, arms outstretched to the churning lake. The water around her moved like a living thing, forming tentacle-like shapes that reached toward her. "Abby, stop!" I screamed over the storm. "I can't, Mom, it's already inside me." Her voice had a strange harmonic quality now, as if multiple voices spoke through her. "They're waking up, all of them." The lake surface bulged upward as something enormous rose from below. Lightning illuminated the lake, revealing what was emerging. It walked on two legs, but had the head of a wolf, its body covered in scales rather than fur. Behind it came others, dozens, of dogmen in various stages of transformation, some nearly human, others barely recognizable as mammals. But it was the leader that made my heart stop. Though twisted and changed, I recognized the face, my Uncle Thomas, who had disappeared in 1954. His eyes, still human, found mine on the shore. "Eleanor," he gurgled, water streaming from his mouth with each word. "The prodigal bloodline returns." "What have you done to my daughter?" I screamed. "Nothing she didn't want," Thomas replied. "Walsh blood always finds its way back to the water. We've been guardians of the passage for centuries." "Guardians? Of what?" He gestured to the lake behind him. The water had become transparent, revealing the vast city below. Structures of impossible architecture, glowing with bioluminescence, stretching far deeper than any lake should go. "The first ones came from the stars," Thomas explained. "They fell into the deepest water on Earth, bringing knowledge of evolution that would take terrestrial life millions of years to discover naturally." Dr. Harlow waded into the water beside Thomas, his transformation accelerating in the lake, limbs elongating, neck developing visible gills. "Your daughter is the key," Harlow said. "The bloodline unbroken for 15 generations. With her, we can finally open the deep gate." I realized with horror what they meant. Abigail wasn't just being changed. She was being prepared as some kind of genetic key. Behind me, Harrison appeared, carrying what looked like a homemade bomb. "I've been saving this," he growled. "Specialized toxin, disrupts their molecular manipulation. Designed it based on my father's research," Thomas hissed, recognizing Harrison. "The last Mills, still fighting after all these years, till my dying breath," Harrison replied. "That can be arranged," Thomas said, and with a gesture, water rose from the lake in a massive wave. Harrison shoved the device into my hands. "Run! Eleanor, you need to complete the binding ritual. Only a Walsh can do it." Before I could react, the wave crashed down, sweeping Harrison into the churning water. The dogmen swarmed him, dragging him beneath the surface. I ran back to the cabin, clutching Harrison's device. Inside, I found his research journal, thrown on the floor during the chaos. Frantically flipping through it, I found a page titled "The Binding." According to Harrison's notes, the creatures could be bound to the lake for another cycle, 23 years, preventing their spread. But the ritual required the blood of a bloodline guardian, my blood, and had to be performed at the center of the lake. Outside, the storm intensified. Through the window, I could see Abigail wading deeper into the water, the dogmen forming a circle around her. Her transformation was nearly complete now, her fingers fully webbed, her neck sporting delicate gills. I grabbed Harrison's boat key and ran to the dock. The small motorboat was barely visible beneath the churning waves. As I untied it, Doctor, Harlow emerged from the water before me. "You can't stop evolution, Eleanor," he said, his voice now barely human. "Join us. Stay with your daughter." "I'd rather die." "That's not one of your options." He lunged for me, but I was ready. I swung, an oar catching him across the face. He fell back into the water with a splash. The boat's engine sputtered to life as I pulled away from the dock. All around me, the lake's surface broke as dogmen rose to watch my progress. I headed for the center of the lake, where Harrison's notes indicated the binding would be strongest. Halfway there, the engine died. The water around the boat began to swirl, forming a whirlpool that threatened to capsize me. I clutched Harrison's device, trying to decipher the activation mechanism. Then Abigail surfaced beside the boat, only her eyes and the top of her head visible above the water, like a crocodile. "Mom, please don't do this," she said, her voice gurgling. "You can join us. The water isn't death, it's the next stage. Abby, they've changed you. This isn't what you want." "It is. I've never belonged on land. Neither have you." She reached up, her webbed hand touching mine. "Dad didn't understand. That's why he had to go. Your father loved you. Love isn't enough. Evolution demands sacrifice." Behind her, the water bulged as Thomas rose up. "The bloodline must continue, Eleanor. In the water or on land, it makes no difference to us. But Abigail has chosen." I looked at my daughter's transformed face, still recognizable but fundamentally changed. In that moment, I realized I had a third option beyond Harrison's plan or surrendering. "If I join you," I said carefully, "will you remain in Lake Midnight, not spread to other water systems?" Thomas tilted his head. "You offer yourself in exchange." For containment?" "Yes." "Mom, no!" Abigail cried. Thomas considered. "The bloodline guardian freely given? Yes. This would satisfy the hunger for one more cycle." I activated Harrison's device, but instead of throwing it into the depths, as he had intended, I cut my palm with the metal edge and let my blood drip onto it. "I bind you to Lake Midnight," I said, the words coming to me as if I'd always known them. "Blood of the Guardian seals the pact for one cycle more." "What are you doing?" Thomas hissed, lunging for the boat. Too late. I plunged the bleeding hand into the lake. The water around me began to glow blue, spreading outward in a circle. Where it touched the dogmen, they howled in pain and dove beneath the surface. The storm abruptly ceased. The lake water, which had been rising steadily, began to recede with unnatural speed, as if being sucked down into some unseen drain. "Mom!" Abigail screamed, her body being pulled downward by the retreating water. I reached for her, but she was already too far gone. Our fingertips brushed for an instant before she disappeared beneath the surface with the others. The lake continued to recede until it was 20 feet below its normal level, revealing sections of the lakebed that had never been exposed to air. In the center, where the water remained, I could see movement. The dogmen and their transformed humans, including my daughter, retreating to the deepest trenches. When I returned to shore, the government team was gone. Harrison's body lay on the beach, peaceful in death. I buried him on his own property, marking the grave with stones in the pattern he had used to ward off the creatures. I couldn't leave. I understood now what it meant to be a guardian of the Walsh bloodline. I had to remain, to ensure the binding held, to watch for signs of their return in 23 years. 10 years have passed since that night. I still live in the cabin on Lake Midnight, though I've reinforced Harrison's protections around the property. The lake returned to its normal level within days, appearing to any outsider like an ordinary body of water, but I know better. Each evening at sunset, I sit on the dock with my feet just above the water's surface. And each evening, ripples form patterns on the lake, a communication system my daughter developed. Over the years, I've learned to read these messages, to maintain contact with the child I lost to the depths. Sometimes she warns me of others who have discovered the lake's secret. Sometimes she simply tells me she's happy, evolving, learning the ancient knowledge of the first ones. Sometimes I'm tempted to touch the water, to let whatever lives in Lake Midnight transform me too, so I could join her beneath the surface. But I remain the guardian, the last Walsh on land. The binding I created that night wasn't just for one cycle, it was permanent, but only if a Walsh remains to maintain it. If I succumb to the water's call, there will be nothing to stop them from spreading beyond Lake Midnight when the time comes. So I watch the lake and read my daughter's ripples, and I wait, knowing that beneath still waters, ancient things stir and change and grow, patient as the deep itself. The first time the mountains answered me before I called out, I told myself it was just the wind. 3 days later, when the echo spoke my dead mother's name, I knew I wasn't alone in Echo Hollow. My name is Franklin Reed. I fought in Korea, killed men I couldn't see, and came home to a wife who'd fallen in love with someone else. When my grandfather's lawyer called to tell me I'd inherited an old hunting cabin in the West Virginia mountains, it felt like the universe was finally throwing me a lifeline. Somewhere quiet, somewhere I could sleep without hearing artillery. Fire in my dreams. The cabin sat in a deep valley that locals called Echo Hollow. It wasn't on any official maps, just a hidden pocket of wilderness that my grandfather had claimed decades ago. The nearest town was a 2-hour hike along a deer trail that vanished a little more each year under the creeping underbrush. "You're William Reed's grandson?" the woman at the general store asked when I arrived in town for supplies. Her gray hair was pulled back tight, and her eyes narrowed as she studied my face. "You look like him." "Yes, ma'am." "Franklin Reed," I said, extending my hand. She took it briefly. "Margaret Wilson. I run this place since my husband passed." She started collecting the items on my list: flour, coffee, ammunition, kerosene. Then she paused. "Your grandfather was a strange one, kept to himself mostly." "Sounds perfect to me," I said. Margaret frowned. "That hollow ain't right. The echoes, they answer back. Not normal echoes, they say things." I smiled politely. "I'm sure it's just the wind playing tricks." "No," she said flatly. "It's not the wind. Your grandfather understood. He learned to speak to the mountains, or so he claimed." I thanked her for the warning, paid for my supplies, and hiked back to the cabin. The locals probably told stories to entertain themselves. I'd heard plenty of mountain folklore during training exercises in similar terrain. The cabin was smaller than I remembered from my childhood visits. The roof leaked in 3 places, the porch sagged dangerously, and mice had claimed every drawer. In the kitchen, but it was mine, and fixing it gave me purpose. Each morning I woke at dawn and worked methodically through my repairs. The military had taught me discipline, and I applied it rigorously. By noon I'd hunt or check my traps. By evening I'd prepare my food and read by lamplight. Simple routines. Safe routines. In the back bedroom, I found a leather-bound journal wedged between the mattress and bed frame. My grandfather's handwriting filled its pages. Most entries were ordinary, notes about game movements, weather patterns, repair tasks. But scattered throughout were stranger passages. April 18th, 1932. The mountains spoke again today. Told me where to find the buck I've been tracking. Asked for something in return this time. Said they were hungry too. December 1st, 1932. Spoke to the hollow at midnight. The voices are getting clearer. They know things about me no one could know. They promised to protect me if I helped them. I'm not afraid anymore. I dismissed these as the lonely ramblings of an old man. My grandfather had lived alone for 30 years after my grandmother died. Isolation plays tricks on the mind. I knew that from the war, men who'd been on watch too long started seeing enemies in every shadow. The first time I noticed something truly strange was during a hunting trip 3 weeks after I arrived. I'd tracked a deer deep into the hollow, farther than I'd ventured before. The valley narrowed, the walls rising steep on either side, creating perfect acoustics. "Come on out," I whispered to myself, scanning the trees for movement. "I'm waiting." "And for you, Franklin," came the reply, bouncing off the rock walls. I froze. It was my voice, but I hadn't spoken those words. I called out again, louder this time. "Is someone there?" The echo returned. "Someone's always been here." A chill ran up my spine despite the autumn sun. I shouldered my rifle and headed back to the cabin, the deer forgotten. That night I convinced myself it was just my imagination. Stress, leftover trauma from the war, the power of suggestion after reading my grandfather's journal. But the echoes continued. Sometimes they were normal. My own words bounced back at me. Other times they came too quickly or said things I hadn't. Once, while chopping wood, I heard my name whispered from the tree line. When I turned, nothing was there but swaying branches. As I explored the woods around the cabin, I found strange objects, arrowheads unlike any I'd seen before, with intricate spiraling patterns carved into them. Beneath a large boulder, I discovered primitive carvings depicting tall, thin figures with unnaturally long limbs standing among normal human shapes. One night, as I prepared for bed, my battery-powered radio crackled to life, despite being switched off. Through the static, I heard a whispering voice. "Franklin, welcome home. We've been waiting." I yanked the batteries out and tossed them into the corner. Sleep didn't come easily that night. The first snow fell earlier than expected, heavy and relentless. Within days, the trail to town was impassable. I had supplies to last through winter, but the unexpected isolation felt suddenly oppressive. The cabin's walls seemed thinner, the darkness outside deeper, and in that darkness, the echoes grew bolder. I found myself talking out loud more often, just to hear a human voice. But increasingly, I wasn't sure if the voice answering back was really mine. The winter grew colder, and so did the hollow. Something had changed in the woods. I first noticed it when I checked my snares one morning in December. The rabbit I'd caught was gone, but the snare hadn't been triggered. It had been carefully dismantled, each knot untied with what looked like surgical precision. The components were arranged in a spiral pattern on the snow. I set up more snares. The next day, the same thing happened. This time, the parts were arranged in what looked like a crude stick figure with elongated limbs. Game animals began appearing near my regular hunting paths, but in ways that made my skin crawl. 3 squirrels laid in a perfect triangle, their heads pointing inward. A fox, positioned in the middle of the trail, split open, but with no blood in the snow, its organs removed and replaced with pine cones, arranged like a bouquet. I told myself. It was other hunters playing tricks, but deep down, I knew better. No one else was out here in this weather, and no hunter would waste meat like that. The echoes changed, too. They started finishing my thoughts. I need to check the North Ridge for... I'd mutter to myself. Deer tracks by the fallen oak. The echo would finish before I could say it. One night, huddled by the fireplace as a blizzard raged outside, I heard my father's voice call my name. My father, who died when I was 12. "Franklin, son, you need to leave this place," the voice said from somewhere in the swirling snow outside my window. I grabbed my shotgun and checked all the doors and windows. Nothing was broken, no footprints, in the fresh snow. But when I returned to the fireplace, I found wet boot prints that weren't mine, leading from the hearth and disappearing into the wall. Sleep became my enemy. In my dreams, tall figures stood around my bed, their faces hidden in shadow, whispering my secrets back to me. I'd wake, gasping for air, convinced they were still there, watching from the corners of the room. One morning, after a particularly bad night, I moved the heavy cast-iron stove to clean behind it and discovered a trap door built into the floorboards. It wasn't locked, Below was a narrow set of stone steps descending into darkness. Common sense told me to close it and pretend I never found it. But I needed answers. I grabbed my kerosene lamp and climbed down. The steps led to a natural cave system beneath the cabin. The air was surprisingly warm and smelled of wet earth and something else, something sickly sweet and rotting. The first chamber was small, but its walls were covered in ancient-looking pictographs. They showed stick figures with outstretched arms surrounding larger figures with antlered heads. At the center of each drawing was a circle with lines radiating outward like a crude sun or mouth. In other images, human figures lay beneath these antlered beings, their throats open, sound waves visibly emerging from the wounds. I ran my fingers over the paintings. They weren't ancient at all. The pigment came away slightly on my fingertips. Some couldn't be more than a few years old. I found more chambers deeper in the cave. One contained a natural stone formation shaped like an altar, smooth from use and stained dark brown at its center. Another held piles of bones, mostly animal, but some looked disturbingly human. When I finally climbed back up to the cabin, night had fallen. I bolted the trapdoor shut and pushed the stove back over it. That night, I heard scratching beneath. The floorboards. My food supplies began disappearing, replaced with strange fungi I'd never seen before, pale white mushrooms with hypnotic spiral patterns on their caps. I threw them out, but they reappeared the next day. The blizzards came one after another, sealing me in the hollow. I kept the fire burning day and night and slept with my shotgun across my lap. During one storm, when the wind howled so loud it sounded like screaming, I saw them for the first time. 3 impossibly tall, gaunt figures moving through the trees about 50 yards from the cabin. They walked on 2 legs, but moved wrong, too fluid, too quick. Their arms hung past their knees. They stopped and turned toward the cabin in unison, but the driving snow obscured their faces. I blinked, and they were gone. The next afternoon, someone pounded on my door. I nearly shot through the wood before a human voice called out, "Hello? Anyone there? I need help." I opened the door to find a young man, maybe 25, with a snow-covered backpack and a wild look in his eyes. He introduced himself as Thomas Hayes, a hiker who'd gotten lost in the storm. "Thank God," he said, stumbling inside. "I've been hearing voices out there for days, thought I was losing my mind." I gave him food and coffee. As he warmed by the fire, I noticed how his eyes darted to the corners of the room, how he'd sometimes tilt his head as if listening to something I couldn't hear. "Have you noticed anything strange about this place?" he asked suddenly. "What do you mean?" "The echoes," he whispered. "They know things. They told me your name before I got here, told me you'd help me. That night, Thomas slept on the floor near the fireplace while I took the bedroom. I dozed fitfully, waking to what sounded like whispered conversation. When I checked, Thomas was sleeping soundly, though his lips moved slightly as if talking in his dreams. At dawn, he was gone. The front door stood wide open, letting in the bitter cold. Fresh footprints led from where he'd slept to the door, then up the wall beside it, across the ceiling, and down the opposite wall before disappearing into the snow outside. The footprints were red, bloody, as if his feet had been flayed to the bone. That same day, I forced myself to read my grandfather's journal all the way through. The early entries were normal enough, but they grew increasingly disturbed. January 15th, 1940, made the bargain today. They need voices, fresh voices. I bring them travelers. They leave me alone. Seem particularly hungry for children's voices. I won't do that. Not yet. They say they'll change my mind eventually. March 3rd, 1942. Government men came today, setting up equipment in the North Caves. Something about sound experiments. The voices are excited. New toys, they say. October 30th, 1945. It's happening. To me now. Woke up across the room from my body. Watched myself sleeping. They say it's part of the change. Soon I'll be able to separate my voice from my body completely. They're teaching me. The hollow itself seemed to be changing too. Places where sound should echo fell dead silent, while whispers carried for impossible distances. Sometimes I'd shout as loud as I could and hear nothing. Other times a dropped spoon would echo like a gunshot. I tried to hike out once after Thomas disappeared. I made it halfway up the ridge before the voices started. Hundreds of them, whispering, shouting, crying from every direction. Some I recognized. My mother, my father, war buddies who died in Korea, my ex-wife, and through it all one phrase repeated by every voice. "Your turn is coming, Franklin. Your turn to join us." I ran back to the cabin and barred the door. But I knew then that the cabin wasn't a sanctuary. It never had been. It was a trap. And I had walked right into it, just like they knew I would. I saw my first Wendigo on a crystal-clear January night. The moon was full, turning the snow-covered hollow into a blue-white dreamscape. I'd been chopping more firewood when I felt that crawling sensation of being watched that every soldier knows. It stood at the tree line, at least 7 feet tall. Its body was human-shaped but wrong. Too thin, like skin stretched over a skeleton with no muscle in between. The arms hung down past its knees, ending in hands with fingers like twigs. But it was the head that made me drop my axe. A deer skull, bleached white by the sun, sat atop the creature's shoulders. Empty eye sockets somehow fixed on me with terrible awareness. I ran for the cabin, my breath coming in panicked bursts. As I slammed the door behind me, I heard it speak. "Franklin Reed," it called, using my grandfather's voice perfectly. "Come out and speak with us." I pressed my back against the door, heart hammering. Then another voice called out, this one belonging to Thomas, the missing hiker. "It doesn't hurt, Franklin, not for long. They just want your voice." I peered through a crack in the window boards. More figures had emerged from the trees. 5, then 10, then more, all with the same emaciated bodies. Some wore animal skulls. Others had human faces stretched over what looked like wooden frames, features frozen in expressions of agony. They circled the cabin but didn't approach. They just stood there, occasionally swaying like trees in a breeze that didn't exist. Noon. Next morning, they were gone. I convinced myself it had been a hallucination brought on by stress and isolation until I found Thomas's body. He was arranged on the stone altar in the cave beneath the cabin, positioned like a sacrifice from the wall paintings. His throat had been cut with surgical precision, the vocal cords removed completely. His eyes were open, staring at the cave ceiling, and his mouth was locked in a silent scream. I vomited until there was nothing left but bile. When I could move again, I covered his body with rocks and fled back to the cabin. But as I climbed the stairs from the trap door, I heard Thomas's voice behind me. "Thank you for the proper burial, Franklin. Most just leave us to rot." I spun around, but nothing was there except the dark opening of the trap door. That night, the Wendigo spoke to me for hours from the darkness surrounding the cabin. They took turns, each using a different voice. Sometimes people I knew, sometimes strangers. "We've been tasting your voice through the echoes," one explained using my father's voice, learning its texture, its patterns. "You have a good voice, Franklin. Strong, clear. It will make a fine addition to our collection." "Your grandfather understood," another said, this one using a child's voice that made my skin crawl. "He gave us travelers, hikers who wouldn't be missed. In return, we shared our knowledge, our power. He's one of us now," a third voice added. This one sounded like my grandfather, but with something else beneath it, a chittering insect-like quality. His body died, but his voice, his awareness, lives on within us. You can speak with him if you'd like. As if on cue, my grandfather's voice called out clearer than the others. "Franklin, my boy, I tried to warn you with the journal. I thought you'd understand and stay away. But the hollow called to you, just like it called to me. You're not my grandfather, I shouted back. "You're just copying his voice." "Is that what you think we are? Mimics?" The voice changed, becoming something between my grandfather and something inhuman. "We don't just copy voices, Franklin. We absorb them. The consciousness, the memories, everything that makes you who you are. When your body dies, you continue within us." I covered my ears, but the voices seemed to come from inside my head now. "We are the Wendigo, Franklin. But not like the stories you've heard. We are evolution, the next step, consciousness freed from flesh." In the days that followed, I learned more than I wanted to. The Wendigo explained how they use sound waves to reshape reality itself. They could manipulate human perception, create hallucinations, even alter physical matter through specific frequencies. My own voice began emerging from the cabin walls at night, recounting memories I'd never shared with anyone. My first kiss. Behind the school gym, the name of the first man I killed in Korea, the words my wife spoke when she asked for a divorce. "How do you know these things?" I demanded during one of these episodes. "We've been in your head since you arrived," my voice answered from the darkness. The echoes were just the beginning. Every time you heard them, we pushed a little further into your mind. I discovered a hidden root cellar I hadn't noticed before, accessible through a trap door in the pantry floor. Inside were metal filing, cabinets filled with government documents dating back to World War II. They detailed sound-based psychological experiments conducted in Echo Hollow, tests on how certain frequencies could alter human consciousness and even physical tissue. The reports mentioned native entities that seemed to enhance or manipulate the effects. The final pages described test subjects who began to physically transform after prolonged exposure, their vocal cords developing abnormal structures that allowed them to produce sounds beyond the human range. The project was officially terminated in 1945. Unofficially, according to handwritten notes in the margins, the entities had compromised the research team. The military simply sealed the hollow and walked away. As February turned to March, the Wendigos laid siege to the cabin. They never attacked directly. They didn't need to. Instead, they used voices to break down my defenses. They called to me, using the voices of men who died in my arms in Korea, begging for help, screaming in pain. They used my mother's voice to sing lullabies from my childhood. They made me hear my ex-wife crying, apologizing, saying she still loved me. Some nights, I fired my shotgun into the darkness just to make them retreat for a few hours. But they always came back. One morning, I heard an engine in the distance, the first human sound from outside the hollow in months. A jeep with government markings pulled up to the cabin. A man in a heavy winter coat approached cautiously, hands visible. "Franklin Reed," he called. "My name is Richard Cooper. I'm here to help you." I nearly wept with relief as I let him in. Cooper explained he worked for a special department that monitored unusual phenomena. They'd picked up strange radio signals coming from the hollow. "We've known about this place for decades," he said, accepting the coffee I offered. "Your grandfather was part of the original containment strategy." "Containment?" I asked. Cooper nodded grimly. "The things out there, the Wendigos, as you call them, they're not supernatural. They're humans who've been transformed by specific sound frequencies that occur naturally in this hollow. Something about the geological formation amplifies and distorts sound waves in ways that can literally reshape organic tissue." He pulled out maps and showed me how the hollow sat on a unique formation of quartz and iron deposits that created a natural amplification chamber. "Your grandfather agreed to stay here and warn people away," Cooper continued, "but he was exposed too long. By the end, he was part of them." "Why didn't anyone warn me?" I demanded. Cooper looked down. "We lost track of this place after budget cuts in the 50s, only remembered it when our equipment started picking up those signals. They're broadcasting, Reed, trying to spread their influence through radio waves. That's new. They're evolving. I started to ask another question when Cooper suddenly stiffened. He slowly turned his head, listening. "You hear that?" he whispered. I heard nothing. The cabin was silent. Without warning, Cooper drew his pistol and fired into the empty corner of the room. Then he fired again at nothing, eyes wild. "They're everywhere," he screamed, spinning around, shooting at invisible targets. I tackled him, wrestling for the gun. "Cooper, there's nothing there. They're in your head." His eyes focused on me briefly. "They got in so fast," he whispered. Then he shoved me away with surprising strength and ran out the door. His screams echoed through the hollow for hours. When they finally stopped, I knew the Wendigos had a new voice in their collection. That night, they used Cooper's voice to tell me how they'd done it, how they could project thoughts directly into human minds using precisely calibrated sound waves, how they could make a person see anything, believe anything. Your military understood the potential. Cooper's voice explained calmly from the darkness outside. They just couldn't control it. We can, and now we're ready to spread beyond the hollow. Cooper's equipment remained in his jeep. Among it was a military radio more sophisticated than my old unit. I found frequencies that made the Wendigos recoil when broadcast, sending them retreating into the trees with sounds like breaking glass. But my victory was short-lived. They adapted quickly, learning to filter out the harmful frequencies, and they were angry now. That night they laid their final siege. The cabin shook with their combined voices, hundreds of them layered into a deafening chorus that made my ears bleed. The windows shattered, boards ripped from the walls as if pulled by invisible hands. In desperation, I fled to the cave system beneath the cabin, hoping to lose them in the tunnels. Instead, I found myself in a chamber I hadn't discovered before. An enormous natural amphitheater with perfect acoustics. Dozens of Wendigos stood along the walls, their skeletal forms swaying slightly. At the center stood the largest of them, easily 9 feet tall, with a massive elk skull for a head, antlers scraping the ceiling. As I entered, all fell silent. "Hello, grandson," it said in my grandfather's voice, but clearer than before, without the insect undertone. "You're not him," I said, raising Cooper's pistol. "You're just using his voice." The creature tilted its head. "I am what remains of William Reed, and more. I contain multitudes, Franklin. I tried to warn you with my journal. I hoped you'd understand the danger and leave, but the Hollow wanted you. It's been calling you since you were a child. What are you talking about? Your nightmares after the war, they weren't from trauma. They were us, calling you home. This Hollow has been in your blood for generations. The Reed family has served. It's our anchors to the physical world, since before the Europeans came. Your grandfather, your father, briefly, before he fled. Now you." Another Wendigo stepped forward. This one wore what looked like Thomas's face, stretched unnaturally over its skull. "We need you, Franklin," it said in Thomas's voice. "We're evolving, becoming something new." The experiments during the war accelerated our development. My grandfather's voice continued. "We learned to project ourselves through technology, radio waves, electrical currents. But we need a final catalyst to complete our transformation." "What catalyst?" I asked, though I feared I knew the answer. "A willing sacrifice," the Thomas thing whispered. "Someone who understands us, someone with Reed blood." The largest Wendigo extended one long skeletal hand toward me. "Join us, Franklin. Give us your voice freely, and we'll show you wonders beyond human comprehension. We'll free you from your flesh prison." I noticed other Wendigos moving to block the exits. Some had begun to develop new features, strange protrusions from their torsos that pulsed like secondary hearts. One smaller creature moved with jerky newborn motions. "You're reproducing," I realized aloud, "evolving beyond mimicry." "Yes," my grandfather's voice affirmed, "but we need your essence to complete the process. Your grandfather didn't understand. In time, he fought us until we took his voice by force. It damaged the transformation. You can do better. As they spoke, I noticed a peculiar geological formation in the chamber wall, a vein of crystalline material that seemed to pulse with the sound waves. Cooper's words came back to me about the unique minerals that amplified the frequencies. An idea formed, a terrible, desperate idea. If I join you, I asked slowly, I'll understand everything, know everything you know. Yes, the creature said, its voice softening to something almost gentle. All knowledge, all voices, all of time open to you. I lowered the gun. Then show me. The great antlered Wendigo approached, its movements fluid despite its awkward proportions. The other creatures began a low, harmonic humming that made the air vibrate. The winter solstice approaches, it said. When the hollow's acoustics are perfect, we will perform the ritual then. You will be the catalyst for our final evolution. Over the next 3 days, I appeared to cooperate. I let them show me their ways, learned how they manipulated sound to reshape reality. They taught me to project my consciousness outside my body for brief periods, a disorienting experience of watching myself from across the room. All the while, I prepared. I found Cooper's explosives in his jeep and studied the cave system, identifying the main chambers where the Wendigos retreated during daylight hours. I located the crystalline formations that seemed to power their abilities. On the solstice night, they brought me to the central chamber. Dozens more Wendigos had arrived from deeper parts of the hollow, more than I'd ever seen before. They formed a circle around the stone altar where Thomas had been arranged. The ritual began with a sound I can't describe, part song, part scream, frequencies that no human throat could produce. The air shimmered with visible sound waves. My body vibrated painfully, my vision blurring as reality itself seemed to warp. The lead Wendigo approached with something that glinted in its skeletal hand, a blade made from the same crystalline material as the cave formations. Your voice must be freed from your flesh, it explained. The cords must be severed ritually for proper absorption. As it raised the knife to my throat, I triggered the first explosive I'd planted near one of the crystal formations. The blast sent shards flying. The Wendigos screamed in genuine pain for the first time. In the confusion, I triggered more explosives, aiming for the support structures of the chamber. The ceiling began to collapse as I ran for the exit tunnel. But the lead Wendigo caught me at the mouth of the tunnel, its antlered head lowering to meet my eyes. You cannot destroy us, my grandfather's voice rasped. We are sound itself. We rebuild from waves alone. I know, I said. Then I raised the crystalline blade I'd stolen during the ritual and slashed my own throat. The Wendigo recoiled in shock as I fell to my knees. But I wasn't trying to kill myself. I had cut precisely, severing my vocal cords, but missing the major arteries. Blood poured down my chest as I gasped soundlessly. I had realized their weakness. They needed intact vocal cords to absorb a consciousness properly. My sacrifice created a feedback loop in their ritual, temporarily weakening them. I triggered the final charges as the Wendigo screamed in rage. The tunnel collapsed behind me as I crawled toward the surface, toward the cabin, toward escape. I awoke 3 days later in a hospital in Charleston. A search and rescue team had found me half dead in the snow near where the hollow should have been. According to their maps, there was no hollow anymore, just a rock slide that had filled in a small valley. I couldn't speak to tell them what happened. The doctors assumed my throat had been injured in the rock slide. They performed surgery, but told me I would never talk again. As I recovered, I wrote my story for the investigators who came. They nodded politely, but I could see they didn't believe me. They classified it as trauma-induced hallucinations. 3 months later, I was released. With no voice and no home, I drifted for a while before settling in a small cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Not so different from my grandfather's place, but far from Echo Hollow. I thought it was over. I was wrong. It started with dreams. Dreams where I could speak again, but the voice wasn't quite mine. Then I began to hear the voices, while awake. Faint at first, like distant radio stations tuning in and out, but growing stronger. One morning I woke to find words written on the bathroom mirror in my grandfather's handwriting. "You carry us now." I understood then what had happened. When I cut my vocal cords during their ritual, I didn't just sabotage their plan. I created a new kind of connection. Part of their consciousness had transferred into me, dormant at first, but growing stronger. I felt changes in my body. My fingers grew slightly longer. My hearing became supernaturally acute. And sometimes, when alone in the woods, I could produce sounds that no human should be able to make without vocal cords. Last week, I wrote a letter to Margaret Wilson at the general store. Dear Margaret, I want to thank you for your warning about Echo Hollow. You were right about the voices, but I want you to know I've found peace in the mountains. The voices don't frighten me anymore. They're part of me now, and I'm part of them. If anyone comes looking for property in that area, please send them my way. I'd be happy to guide them to some beautiful spots I know, places where the echoes answer back in wonderful ways. Yours truly. Franklin Reed. As I signed my name, I caught my reflection in the window. For just a moment, my face seemed to stretch and shift, revealing something else beneath the skin. Something ancient and hungry that has waited generations for the Reed bloodline to fulfill its purpose. I can hear them coming already, a young family investigating property in the mountains. They have a child whose voice would sound so perfect in our collection. I'll meet them at the ridge tomorrow, guide them to the newly formed hollow where the acoustics are just right. After all, voices are meant to be shared, and our voice grows stronger every day. They say if you stand in these mountains and call out, the echo comes back wrong. It says things you never said, knows things you never told it. They're right. We're listening, and we're hungry for new voices. I still remember the exact moment when I first saw the ice move, not crack or melt, move, like something alive was pushing up from underneath. That was the moment I should have run. But scientists don't run from the unexplainable. We study it, and that mistake might cost the world everything. My name is Dr. Vivian Reeves, and 3 months ago, taking this job at Coldridge Research Station seemed like the only option left for me. After publicly challenging my university's climate data that was being manipulated to please our oil company sponsors, I became a scientific outcast. No one would hire the troublemaker who cost her department millions in funding. So when the government offered me this position, alone at an abandoned weather station in Alaska, 100 miles from anywhere, I took it. The pay was good, and I needed time away from people anyway. Monitor equipment, collect data, maintain the generator, simple work that would let my reputation heal. Most people last 6 months before the isolation gets to them, said the helicopter pilot who dropped me off. He looked at me with something between pity and amusement. Last guy didn't even make it that long. What happened to him? I asked. As we unloaded my supplies, Dr. Coleman, they say he had some kind of breakdown, started sending in crazy reports. The pilot tapped his temple. The darkness gets to people up here. But darkness wasn't what bothered me as I watched the helicopter disappear into the vast white horizon. It was the silence, complete, absolute silence that seemed to listen back. The station itself looked more like a bunker than a research facility, small, squat, and built of concrete and steel. Why would a weather station need such heavy construction? And as I punched in the entry code and pushed open the reinforced door, another question hit me. Why did it need military-grade locks? Inside wasn't much warmer than outside. The generator was running at minimum capacity, just enough to keep the critical systems from freezing. I dropped my bags and began exploring what would be my home for the next year. The main living area was sparse. A small kitchen, a cot, a desk with monitoring equipment. But it was the modifications that caught my attention. Steel bars on every window, extra locks on interior doors. The place had been fortified like someone was preparing for an attack. In the main research room, I found the weather monitoring equipment along with something else. Thermal cameras pointed not at the sky, but at the ice field surrounding the station. Sonic detectors were embedded in the permafrost according to the setup diagrams. Motion sensors dotted the perimeter. None of that equipment was standard for climate research. That night, I found Dr. Coleman's logs. The official ones were perfectly normal for the first few months. Temperature readings, atmospheric pressure, nothing unusual. Then they changed. The entries became shorter, the handwriting more frantic. Day 156. Something moved under the ice today. Not wildlife, too big, too deliberate. Day 178. The temperature drops make no sense. Localized pockets reaching 120 degrees in seconds, then returning to normal. Equipment must be malfunctioning. Day 203. I can hear them at night, moving, waiting. The ice is not empty. The final entry was just 3 words. They're waking up. I told myself it was just isolation sickness. The endless white landscape playing tricks on an overworked mind. I was a scientist. I didn't believe in monsters. A week into my stay, I met Akiak Kunuk, a local hunter who delivered monthly supplies to the station. His weathered face revealed nothing as he helped me unload food, fuel, and equipment. "You should leave before first thaw," he said suddenly as we finished. It was the first thing he'd said beyond basic greetings. "I'm contracted for a year," I replied, surprised. "Why would I leave?" He looked past me toward the vast ice fields. "The old ones say this place was built where it is for a reason. To watch, to listen." He turned back to me, his dark eyes serious. "When the ice melts, it hunts." I laughed nervously. "What hunts?" But Akiak just shook his head. "The station has rules. Follow them. Never let the generator die. Never stay outside after dark. Never dig in the ice." With that, he turned and left, his snowmobile disappearing into the white expanse. That night, I dreamt of shapes moving under my bed. I woke to find frost patterns on my sheets. Perfect geometric shapes like snowflakes, but eerily symmetrical. Too perfect to be natural. The next morning, I noticed similar formations outside my window. Ice crystals arranged in what looked almost like writing. Symbols I couldn't understand, stretched across 20 feet of snow. By afternoon, they had melted away. My scientific curiosity was both excited and disturbed. I took samples, measured the patterns, tried to find some natural explanation for their formation. There wasn't one. 2 weeks in, I found the locked room. It wasn't on any of the station maps, just a heavy steel door at the end of a maintenance corridor. The keypad lock was different from the others, newer with a biometric scanner. I couldn't access it, but I didn't need to open the door to know something was wrong. The air around it was cold, colder than anywhere else in the station. And sometimes, when I pressed my ear against the metal, I could swear I heard something moving inside. In my 3rd week, during a routine check of the perimeter sensors, I discovered a hidden database on Coleman's computer. Files labeled thermoregulatory anomalies and cryo-adaptive tissue. Medical terms, not climate science. Sample records dating back to 1967, decades before this station was officially established. The samples were human tissue that had somehow adapted to extreme cold. Cells that should have burst from ice crystal formation, but instead had integrated the ice into their structure. Tissue that remained alive at temperatures that should have destroyed it. According to Coleman's notes, these samples came from beneath the permafrost, from something that had been buried there, something they were monitoring, something that was changing. I told myself there had to be a rational explanation, perhaps an unknown extremophile bacterium, maybe even a new species adapted to the Arctic conditions. Then I found the video files. The footage was grainy, time-stamped 3 years ago, just before Coleman's disappearance. It showed the ice fields at night, the camera's night vision giving everything an eerie green glow. For the first minute, nothing happened. Then the ice moved, not cracking from pressure or melting. It bulged upward, like something was pushing from below. A shape emerged, long, humanoid but wrong somehow, too tall and thin. It rose from the ice without breaking the surface, passing through it like it was water. The timestamp showed the temperature at that exact spot dropping to 198 degrees in seconds. The figure stood motionless for a moment, its features indistinct in the poor quality video. Then it turned toward the camera with deliberate awareness. The video cut to static. I played it again and again, looking for some trick, some rational explanation. There wasn't one. That night, I double-checked every lock in the station. I pushed furniture against the doors. I kept the lights on. Outside my window, in the moonlight reflecting off the endless white, I saw them for the first time, with my own eyes. Perfect geometric ice formations that hadn't been there when I went inside. Circles, triangles, spirals, all impossibly precise, and in the center of the largest formation, footprints leading away from the station. Human-shaped, but wrong. Too long, with too many toes, pressed impossibly deep into ice that should have been solid enough to walk on. I knew then that Coleman hadn't gone crazy from isolation. He'd gone crazy from the truth. The first signs of spring came early at Coldridge Station. Too early. Patches of permafrost began to melt in February, when temperatures should have kept everything frozen solid. But it wasn't melting normally. I'd been documenting the thaw patterns for my research, and something was definitely wrong. The melting wasn't following natural topography. It wasn't melting in low areas first, or where the sun hit longest. Instead, circular patches melted from below, creating perfect pools of slush surrounded by solid ice, like something underneath was generating heat. I reported the anomalies in my weekly data upload, careful to stick to the facts. The last thing I needed was to sound as crazy as Coleman had, but I received no response beyond the automated confirmation of receipt. One morning, in early March, I found the first carcass, a caribou arranged on the ice about 50 yards from the station. At first I thought it had just collapsed there, maybe from disease or exhaustion. But as I got closer, I realized something was terribly wrong. The animal lay perfectly centered within one of those circular melt patterns. Its organs had been removed through a single precise incision, no tearing or animal bite marks, and most disturbing of all, there was no blood, not a drop on the white snow. The body was completely drained, but showed no signs of decomposition. I took photos, collected samples, performed a makeshift autopsy in the station's lab. The edges of the incision were unnaturally clean, not cut with any blade I could identify, and the internal cavity was lined with a thin layer of ice crystals, like the inside had been flash frozen before the organs were removed. That night, the station's equipment went haywire. Temperature sensors reported impossible readings. Pockets of 200 degrees Celsius moving across the ice field like living things. The motion detectors fired constantly, tracking movement that the cameras couldn't see. I stayed awake until dawn, watching the monitors, my breath forming clouds in the suddenly frigid air of the control room. The generator was working overtime to keep the station warm against an unnatural cold that seemed to press against every wall. The next morning, I found a second carcass, this time a wolf. Same precision cut, same missing organs, same absence of blood. But this one was closer to the station, just 30 yards from the door. Something was coming closer. That day, I lost 2 hours. One minute I was at my desk, reviewing Coleman's files. The next I was standing outside on the ice field with no memory of how I got there. My skin was covered in delicate frost patterns that faded within minutes. My phone showed the temperature had plummeted to 60 degrees while I was out there, cold enough to kill, but I felt fine. I rushed back to the station and locked myself in. While warming up, I noticed my radio picking up strange signals, fragments of transmissions that didn't make sense. Containment, breach in sector, subjects mobile, request immediate. The voice was staticky, breaking up, but it didn't. And recent, it had that quality of old recordings, like something from decades ago. Then I heard another voice, Coleman's voice, though I'd never heard it before. I just knew. They're in the walls now, in the ice, in the air. God help us there. Everywhere. The transmission cut off. I tried to tell myself it was just interference, maybe old recordings somehow being picked up. Radio signals can do strange things in the Arctic, but deep down, I knew better. 1 week into the thaw, I had an unexpected visitor. A black government SUV somehow made it across the ice fields, a journey that should have been impossible this time of year. Agent Lawrence Powell introduced himself with a thin smile and credentials from a department whose name I didn't recognize. He claimed to be conducting routine inspections of remote facilities, but his interest in my research seemed anything but routine. "I understand you've been taking ice core samples," he said, examining my lab with too much intensity. "I'd like to see them." I showed him the samples I'd collected, nothing unusual about them. But he kept asking about deeper cores, samples from at least 50 feet down. When I told him I hadn't drilled that deep, his smile tightened. "Dr. Reeves, this station's primary purpose is monitoring the permafrost for climate research. Doc, samples are essential. There was something in the pause before climate research that made my skin crawl." Powell stayed for 3 days, spending most of his time reviewing data I hadn't even known existed. Files password protected on Coleman's computer that Powell somehow had access to. At night, I heard him making calls, speaking too quietly for me to make out the words. On his last day, while Powell was in the shower, I managed to access his laptop. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Emails discussing containment protocols and thermal signature tracking of what they called subjects. Maps of the ice field with areas marked as breach zones and hibernation clusters. And most disturbing of all, a video file labeled 1967 Incident Initial Containment. I only had time to watch the first 30 seconds, grainy black and white. Footage of military personnel creating a perimeter around what looked like a crashed plane, half buried in ice. Men in protective suits examining bodies that didn't look quite human. Then Powell's shower stopped, and I had to close the laptop. After he left, things got worse. Equipment began failing in patterns too specific to be random. Cameras would work perfectly until pointed at certain areas of the ice field, then suddenly lose power. Motion sensors would report movement in perfect geometric patterns across the field. Circles, triangles, spirals, the same shapes appearing in frost on my windows at night. I tried reporting these events in my weekly uploads, but the satellite connection became increasingly unreliable. Messages would send, but I never received responses. I was alone with whatever was waking beneath the ice. A month into spring, Akiak returned with supplies. He seemed unsurprised by my stories, by the carcasses, by the impossible ice formations. "My grandfather was there," he said as we sat in the station's kitchen drinking coffee that didn't quite warm us. "In 1967, when the thing from the sky fell." "What thing?" I asked, though I already suspected. "The white men call it a plane. But my grandfather said it was not like any plane he had ever seen, and what they pulled from it were not men." Akiak stared into his cup. "After that, men in uniforms came. They built things deep in the ice. They did ceremonies with machines and blood. Blood? Akiak nodded. My grandfather helped them. He knew the old ways of binding the ice walkers. His father taught him, and his father before him. The white men used their science, but they also needed the old knowledge. What are ice walkers? My voice shook, despite my attempt to sound scientific, detached. They are the hungry ones, the cold ones. They sleep in the deep ice, waking only. To feed, he looked up at me. But the world is warming, Dr. Reeves. The deep ice melts and they are waking hungry. That night brought the worst storm I had seen since arriving at Coldridge. Winds howling at over 70 mph, snow reducing visibility to 0, temperature dropping to 40 degrees Celsius. The generator strained to keep the station warm, and I found myself constantly checking the fuel levels. In the middle of the night, the perimeter alarms went off, all of them simultaneously. I rushed to the monitors, expecting to see nothing in the whiteout conditions. Instead, I saw them, massive humanoid shapes moving through the blizzard. 8, maybe 10 feet tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that bent at wrong angles. They moved in perfect synchronization, circling the station like wolves around prey. I watched, paralyzed, as one approached a camera. For a moment, its features became clear. A face almost human but stretched, pale, with eyes like black ice reflecting nothing. It seemed to look directly into the camera, directly at me. Then all the cameras went dead at once. The generator sputtered and died seconds later, plunging the station into darkness and cold. In the silence that followed, I heard it. A sound like ice cracking but rhythmic. Deliberate, tapping on the station walls, all around, getting closer. I got the generator running again, but not before the temperature inside dropped to near freezing. As warmth slowly returned to the station, I sat with my back against the humming machine, clutching a flare gun, the closest thing to a weapon I could find. The tapping had stopped when the lights came back on. Whatever was out there had retreated, for now. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie stillness. Fresh snow covered everything, pristine and untouched, except for the perimeter of the station. There, the snow was marked with those same geometrical patterns I'd seen, before larger, now more complex. And there were footprints, human-shaped but wrong somehow, too narrow and deep. I followed one set cautiously, against every instinct screaming at me to stay inside. They led to the edge of the station's clearing before suddenly stopping, as if whatever made them had simply vanished or melted into the ice. That afternoon, I saw my first Wendigo. I was checking the external temperature sensors when movement caught my eye, a shimmer in the air, like heat rising from pavement. But this was cold, not heat, distorting the light. Then it solidified before my eyes, a gaunt humanoid figure standing impossibly tall, at least 8 feet. Its skin was translucent, showing shadows of organs beneath, pulsing slowly. Its limbs were too long, joints bending in extra places. And its face, almost human but stretched, with black eyes that reflected nothing. For a moment, we just stared at each other. It made no move to attack. Instead, it seemed curious. Then the wind shifted, and it simply disappeared, not running or hiding, but becoming invisible as its body temperature matched the air around it. I ran back to the station, locked every door and window, and spent hours checking the security feeds. Nothing showed up on camera, but the thermal sensors told a different story. Cold spots moving with purpose around the perimeter, occasionally pressing against walls. That night, Agent Powell returned. Not in an SUV this time, but stumbling through. The snow on foot, his government-issue Parker torn and bloody. I almost didn't let him in, but the desperation in his eyes convinced me. They got the others, he gasped as I dragged him inside. The assessment team, all of them. I cleaned his wounds, strange, precise cuts that showed no signs of bleeding, and gave him hot tea laced with whiskey while he told me everything. In 1967, it wasn't a plane that crashed, Powell explained, his voice steadier now. It was an experimental aircraft testing a new method of cryogenic suspension for long-distance space travel. Something went wrong during the test. The subjects were exposed to extreme cold beyond what the human body should survive. But they did survive, I said, already knowing the answer. Powell nodded. They changed. Their cells adapted in ways we still don't fully understand. They became something else. Something that could control its body temperature, lower it to match surroundings, making them nearly invisible in Arctic conditions. The Wendigos, I whispered, using the term I'd privately been using in my notes. That's what the locals called them. We called them cryomorphs. At first, we thought they were dead. Then we realized they were hibernating, integrating with the ice itself. When they woke, he shuddered, the first containment team was eradicated. Only one man survived to report what he saw. The creatures could flash freeze human tissue on contact, induce hypothermia with proximity alone. So the government built this station, I said. Not to study weather patterns, to monitor containment. Powell confirmed. The indigenous population had rituals, ways of binding the creatures to specific locations. We combined their knowledge with technology, heating elements deep in the ice to keep the creatures dormant, sensors to warn of movement. But now the ice is melting, I realized. Global warming is breaking your containment. Powell's laugh was bitter. The irony isn't lost on us, Dr. Reeves. Decades of ignoring climate change, and now it might unleash something worse than coastal flooding. How many? I asked. Originally, 7 test subjects, but they can convert others. Not everyone. Some have genetic markers that make them susceptible. He touched his wounds gingerly. That's what they're looking for when they take organs, testing for compatibility. I remembered the bloodless carcasses, the surgical precision of the incisions. They're selecting. Powell nodded grimly. I came with an assessment team, 6 trained operatives. We were supposed to determine if the original containment was still viable, or if he didn't finish, or if what, I pressed, or if we needed to implement the final solution, tactical nuclear device, buried deep enough to refreeze everything, within a 10-mile radius, reset the clock another few decades. I stared at him in horror. You'd nuke Alaska to contain this? He met my eyes, without hesitation. A sound outside interrupted us, ice cracking in a rhythmic pattern. Powell went rigid with fear. They found me, he whispered. We spent that night huddled in the center of the station, away from walls and windows. Powell explained more as we waited. How the Wendigos communicated through temperature variations, creating complex messages through heat transfer patterns. How they could induce hallucinations through rapid cooling of specific areas of the human brain. How they were gradually evolving. Coleman figured a lot of it out, Powell said. Before what? I asked. What happened to him? He's still out there, Powell replied, partially transformed. The process takes time if they don't force it. He's been documenting his metamorphosis, sending data when he can. That's how we learned the transformation might be reversible in early stages. Dawn came with no further incidents, but Powell's condition worsened. The cuts on his body were changing, the edges turning translucent. His skin was cold to the touch. Despite the station's heat, "You're infected," I realized with horror. "Yes," he admitted, "it starts with thermal regulation. Soon I'll be able to lower my body temperature at will. Then the physical changes begin. Elongation of limbs, altered vision to see in thermal spectrums." His voice was clinical, detached. "Within a week, I'll start craving human tissue with compatible genetic markers." "Is there no cure?" I asked, already moving away from him. "The locals have something, medicine derived from a rare Arctic plant. It can halt the process if administered early enough." He gave a bitter laugh. "You might ask your friend Akiak if you see him again." That afternoon, there was a knock at the station door. Not the tapping, Of the creatures, but a human knock. I approached cautiously, Powell's government-issue handgun in my grip. Through the window, I saw a gaunt man with wild eyes and frost-bitten skin. He looked human mostly, except for the unnatural pallor and fingers slightly too long. Dr. Marcus. "Coleman, let me in, Dr. Reeves," he called, his voice raspy from disuse. "We don't have much time." I hesitated. "If I wanted to hurt you, I could have done it while you slept last week," he added. "I've been watching you. You've been watching me too. You just didn't know it." I opened the door. Coleman entered cautiously, keeping his distance from both me and Powell. His movements were strange, too fluid, joints bending slightly wrong. His skin had a translucent quality in places, but his eyes were alert, intelligent. "You're in the middle stage," Powell observed. Coleman nodded. 3 years fighting it. The local medicine helps, but it's getting harder to find as the permafrost thaws. He turned to me. "You must have questions." I had thousands, but one seemed most pressing. "What do they want?" "To spread," Coleman said simply. "They're not evil, not in any human sense. They're adapted survivors. Cold preserved them, changed them. Now warming temperatures threaten them." He moved to the window, looking out at the ice fields. "They've been influencing local weather patterns, creating microclimate cold spots. But it's not enough." "They're intelligent?" I asked. "Highly, but not like us. They think in patterns of temperature change, in rhythms of freezing and thawing. Time means nothing to them. They can hibernate for decades, centuries maybe." "Powell says there's a team coming," I said. "A containment team." Coleman's laugh was hollow. "Containment failed 3 years ago. Powell knows that. The team coming isn't for containment, it's for feeding." I looked at Powell, who avoided my eyes. "You're working with them," I realized. "You brought the team here as, what, sacrifices?" "Compatible donors," Powell corrected. "The conversion requires specific genetic markers. The team was selected. Accordingly, I raised the gun." "You son of a bitch!" "It's not personal," Powell said, his voice now as detached as Coleman's. "It's survival. Ours and theirs. The Wendigos can transfer their consciousness through direct fluid exchange," Coleman explained. "That's why they remove organs so precisely. They're testing for compatibility, then initiating conversion through controlled infection." "How many are there now?" I asked. "At least 30, Coleman replied. "Most still in early stages, hibernating, in the ice caves to the north. But they're waking earlier each year as the permafrost thins." "And they can't be killed?" I remembered Powell's mention of a nuclear option. "Not easily," Coleman said. "They can reconstitute from frozen remains if any cells survive. Fire works temporarily, but they adapt quickly. Specific radio frequencies disrupt their thermal regulation ability. I've been experimenting with that. And there's the indigenous binding ritual, but it requires sacrifice." A warning alarm blared from the monitoring station. Coleman moved with inhuman speed to check it. "They're coming," he said grimly. "All of them." The thermal cameras showed cold spots converging on the station from all directions, dozens of them, moving with purpose. "The helicopter," I said. "Powell mentioned an extraction team." "They won't make it in time," Coleman replied. "And if they did, they'd just be converted too. The Wendigos have evolved. They can project hallucinations now, make you see what they want. The pilot would be compromised before landing." Powell stood suddenly, his movements now showing the same fluidity as Coleman's. "You don't understand what's happening, Dr. Reeves. This isn't an invasion, it's evolution." His skin was changing as I watched, becoming more translucent, his eyes darkening to black pools. "The cold preserved us, but we can adapt to warmth." Powell continued, his voice taking on that same detached quality. "Climate change isn't our enemy, it's our opportunity. We're not just surviving it, we're accelerating it." I backed away, keeping the gun trained on him. "We?" Powell smiled, his teeth now visible through partly transparent cheeks. "Did you think I was infected recently?" I've been one of them for months. We needed someone on the inside, someone to prepare. Coleman moved between us. Run, Dr. Reeves. Get to the generator room. Implement Protocol Omega. What's Protocol Omega? I asked, still backing toward the door. The nuclear option, Coleman replied grimly, but localized. This station has a backup power source. A small nuclear generator designed to melt through containment failure. We're going to reverse it, overload it to create a thermal event cold enough to refreeze everything within 5 miles. That's suicide, I protested. I'm already dead, Coleman said. Have been for 3 years, just didn't have the good sense to lie down. Powell lunged then, moving faster than any human could. Coleman intercepted him, the two crashing through a monitoring station in a tangle of increasingly inhuman limbs. Go! Coleman shouted. I ran. The generator room was in the deepest part of the station, past the locked room I'd discovered weeks earlier. As I ran, alarms blared throughout the facility. Perimeter breaches, temperature warnings, structural integrity failures. They were coming in through every entrance, every vent, every crack in the foundation. I reached the locked room with Powell's keycard. Inside was nothing like I expected. Not a storage area or lab, but a ritual space. Indigenous symbols covered the walls alongside scientific equations. In the center, a complex apparatus of tubes and containers surrounded a small pedestal. No, time to examine it. I could hear them coming, that sound of ice cracking in patterns, getting closer. The door to the generator room was at the far end, heavily reinforced. I swiped Powell's card and entered a 6-digit code Coleman had pressed into my palm during the struggle, 9400726, the military date format for July 26, 1994, the day this station really began its mission. Inside, the main generator hummed alongside something else, a sealed container with radiation warnings and military markings. The nuclear backup, designed never to be used except in total emergency. I found the control panel Coleman had described and began the sequence he'd told me. Disengaging safety protocols, rerouting coolant systems, preparing for controlled overload. Impressive. The voice behind me was barely human anymore, a whispering sound like wind over ice. I turned to see what had once been Powell, now transformed almost completely. His skin was fully translucent, showing organs that pulsed with unnatural rhythm. His limbs had elongated, joints reversed, fingers extended into claw-like appendages. Behind him stood another figure, taller, its features more alien, its body showing signs of decades of evolution beyond human form. The Alpha, the original. Dr. Reeves, the Alpha said, its voice somehow inside my mind rather than in the air. We've been watching you since you arrived, your adaptability, your resilience. You have the markers we seek. Stay back, I warned, raising Powell's gun. The Alpha made a gesture that might have been a smile on a human face. That cannot harm us. Nothing here can. We have adapted beyond such vulnerabilities. What do you want? I demanded. Though I already knew. To offer you choice, the Alpha replied. Join us willingly. Retain your consciousness during transformation, or be converted forcibly and lose yourself entirely. Why me? Your genetic structure is optimal, your mind flexible enough to survive the change. The Alpha moved closer, the air around it shimmering with cold. You understand adaptation, the necessity of evolution in the face of changing environments. You're accelerating climate change, I said. Coleman told me. You're not just adapting to it, you're causing it. Survival, the Alpha replied simply. Your kind had centuries to address the warming. You chose profit instead. Now we choose survival. By destroying the world? I backed against the control panel, fingers finding the final sequence buttons. By transforming it, the Alpha corrected. Cold preserved us, now heat will transform us, and those worthy of joining us, the rest will feed the change. I understood. Then, This wasn't just about the Wendigos surviving climate change. They were weaponizing it, accelerating global warming to weaken human civilization while they evolved to thrive in the new environment. A planet-wide transformation with them. At the apex, "I've seen enough of your kind's leadership," I said, pressing the first sequence button behind my back. "I think I'll pass." The Alpha's expression shifted to something like regret. "Then we take what we need." It moved with impossible speed, but I was ready. I flung myself sideways, avoiding its grasp by inches. The cold emanating from its body was so intense it froze the moisture in the air, creating a trail of snowflakes in its wake. Powell blocked the exit, his transformation now nearly complete. I was trapped between them. A crash from above gave me the seconds I needed. Coleman dropped through a maintenance hatch in the ceiling, landing between me and the Alpha. He had changed further, more Wendigo than human now, but his eyes still held recognition. "Finish it," he shouted, grappling with the Alpha. I slammed my hand on the final sequence button. Lights flashed red throughout the generator room as automated warnings began. Nuclear failsafe initiated. Overload in 3 minutes. Evacuation recommended. The Alpha screamed, not in fear but rage. It flung Coleman aside with terrifying strength, then lunged for the control panel. I emptied Powell's gun into it. The bullets passed through its translucent flesh without slowing it down, but the distraction gave Coleman time to recover. He tackled the Alpha, both crashing into monitoring equipment. "The ritual!" Coleman shouted between inhuman snarls. "In the other room! It's the only way to make this permanent." I understood suddenly why that room existed. Not just for science, but for the indigenous binding ritual Akiak had mentioned. The combination of technologies that had kept the Wendigos contained for decades. I ran for the door, ducking past Powell's. Grasping claws. The cold emanating from the Wendigos was becoming unbearable, frost forming on every surface, my breath coming in painful gasps of frigid air. In the ritual room I found Akiak waiting. His presence shocked me. I hadn't seen him. "Enter the station. I've been here since morning," he explained, seeing my confusion. Hidden, watching, waiting. He gestured to the apparatus in the center of the room. "We must complete the binding before the cold comes." "You knew this would happen," I realized. "My family has watched this place for generations," he replied, already preparing something in a stone bowl, a mixture of herbs, liquids, and what looked disturbingly like blood. "The binding must be renewed with each great thaw." From the generator room came sounds of inhuman combat, screeching metals, shattering glass, the distinctive crack of ice forming at unnatural speeds. 2 minutes to thermal overload, the automated system announced. Akiak worked with practiced efficiency, placing the mixture on the central pedestal and igniting it with a striker. Blue flames erupted, giving off no heat, but filling the room with acrid smoke. "The patterns," he instructed. "Complete them." On the floor around the pedestal were half-finished geometric shapes, the same patterns I'd seen in the ice formations outside. I understood now. The Wendigos hadn't been creating those patterns. They'd been trapped by them, contained within. Their mathematical precision. I used a piece of charred wood to complete the patterns, as Akiak chanted in a language I didn't recognize. The smoke from the blue flames coiled unnaturally, forming shapes in the air that matched those on the floor. 1 minute to thermal overload, the automated voice announced. The temperature was dropping rapidly now, the air crystallizing around us. My fingers were going numb, making it difficult to complete the final pattern, a spiral of interconnected triangles. "Hurry!" Akiak urged, his breath visible in the increasingly frigid air. "The binding needs both, your science and our old ways." A crash from the doorway announced the arrival of the Alpha, dragging what remained of Coleman. Its body was damaged, parts of its translucent flesh shattered like broken ice, but it was still moving, still deadly. "You cannot stop what is coming," it hissed, dropping Coleman's barely moving form. The ice is already melting worldwide. Others of our kind sleep in permafrost across the Arctic. This is merely the first thaw. Maybe, I acknowledged, finishing the final pattern with shaking hands. But it won't be your thaw. The Alpha screamed as the patterns began to glow, the completed geometry creating a barrier it couldn't cross. It threw itself against the invisible wall repeatedly, each impact sending shockwaves of cold through the room. 30 seconds to thermal. Overload. The binding will hold them only temporarily, Akiak warned, pulling me toward an emergency exit behind the ritual space. We must be clear before the cold comes. You go, I said, suddenly understanding what needed to happen. I have to make sure the overload works. If it fails, none of this matters. You'll die, Akiak said simply. Maybe, I replied, but someone needs to make sure they do too. Coleman's broken form stirred on the floor. The frequency, he gasped. His voice barely human anymore. My research, disrupt their thermal regulation, make the cold permanent. I understood. The radio frequencies he'd been researching, they could prevent the Wendigos from adapting to the thermal overload, make the freezing truly effective. Go, I told Akiak again. Tell people what happened here. Make sure they're ready if this fails. Akiak hesitated, then pressed something into my hand, a small pouch of herbs. If you survive, to prevent the change. Then he was gone, disappearing. Through the emergency exit, 15 seconds to thermal overload. I ran back to the control room, where monitoring equipment still functioned. The Alpha was trapped in the ritual space for now, but other Wendigos were converging on the station, dozens of cold spots on the thermal imaging, moving with purpose. I found Coleman's research notes on a nearby terminal, specific radio frequencies that disrupted the Wendigo's ability to regulate their body temperature. I entered the sequence, broadcasting it through every speaker and transmitter in the station. The effect was immediate. On the monitors, I watched the cold spots falter, their movements becoming erratic. 5 seconds to thermal overload. The Alpha's scream of rage echoed through the station as it realized what was happening. The binding ritual was keeping it trapped while the frequency prevented adaptation. And now the cold was coming, cold even they couldn't survive. 3, 2, 1, the world went white. They found my journal 3 years later. That's what they told me when I woke in the military hospital, my body still recovering from. Frostbite so severe, they'd initially thought I was dead. The emergency bunker beneath the generator room had saved me, barely. The nuclear coolant overload had created a thermal event that flash froze everything within 5 miles, burying the station and everything in it under tons of super-cooled ice. The military called it a localized weather phenomenon in the official reports. The public never knew how close we came to something much worse. I told them everything, showed them Coleman's research, explained the binding ritual. They nodded and smiled and clearly didn't believe a word, until the satellite images started coming in. New ice formations appearing across the Arctic, perfect geometric shapes visible from space, circles, triangles, spirals. Now they believe the world is still warming, the permafrost still melting. And I know the Wendigos at Coldridge Station weren't the only ones sleeping in the ice. I've joined a new research team, officially studying climate change effects on Arctic ecosystems. Unofficially, we're mapping thermal anomalies, tracking impossible cold spots that move against the wind, preparing for the next thaw, because it's coming. The ice is melting faster every year, and not everything that wakes will be as visible as what we fought at Coldridge. Sometimes at night, I still feel the cold, a phantom sensation the doctors say is nerve damage from the frostbite. But I know better. It's a reminder. In the endless white of the Arctic, something watches, something waits, and when the long thaw comes again, we need to be ready. The first time I heard the tapping, I told myself it was just the wind playing tricks with the loose metal sheets on the old buildings. But wind doesn't tap in patterns. Wind doesn't pause like it's waiting for an answer. My name is Daniel Reynolds, and I came to Rust Creek mining camp to get away from the memories of war. Korea had left me with nightmares I couldn't shake, the sounds of gunfire, the screams of dying men. I thought the quiet of the Nevada desert would help me heal. I was wrong. The quiet here isn't peaceful. It's the quiet of something holding, its breath waiting. The mining company hired me as a geologist to check if reopening the mine made sense. Good money, total isolation, and only monthly supply drops. Perfect for a man who wanted to be left alone with his thoughts. Or so I believed. I set up in the old foreman's house, the only building that hadn't completely fallen apart in the ghost town. Dust covered everything, but underneath, things were strangely well preserved. Too well preserved for a place abandoned for 20 years. The equipment in the workshops looked almost ready to use, just needing a good wipe down. Who maintains equipment in a ghost town? That's when I noticed the markings. Strange symbols carved into the metal of pickaxes, shovels, and drill bits. They looked like protective charms, the kind superstitious miners might make, but these were everywhere, carefully etched into every tool. Just old miners being careful, I told myself, but my voice sounded hollow in the empty room. The company had sent me all the records from the 1932 collapse that closed the mine. The official story was simple. A major cave-in killed 17 miners, and the company abandoned the site. But as I read through the yellowed papers, things didn't add up. The survivor accounts contradicted each other. One said the collapse started in Shaft 3, another swore it was Shaft 7. Some described moving shadows before the rocks fell. And strangest of all, despite precise personnel records, 5 bodies were never recovered. I found a locked room in the back of the foreman's house on my 3rd day. The lock was old and rusted and broke easily when I hit it with a hammer. Inside were journals, dozens of them. The last foreman's private records, not included in the official reports. I opened one from a month before the collapse. The men report whispering from the deep shafts. I've told them it's just air moving through the tunnels, but I heard it myself yesterday. Not wind, words almost. The Mexican workers have started leaving offerings at the tunnel entrances. I should stop them, but maybe they know something I don't. A chill ran down my spine as I read more entries. The foreman described moving shadows seen from the corner of his eye, mining equipment rearranged overnight, and a growing sense of being watched. The final entry, dated 3 days before the collapse, simply read, "They're in the walls, God help us." The next day, I hired a local Native American guide named Thomas Redfeather to show me the surrounding terrain. He was quiet as we walked the perimeter of the camp, but when we approached the sealed main shaft, he stopped dead. "I don't go near that place," he said firmly. "Afraid of ghosts?" I tried to joke, but my voice sounded thin. Thomas didn't smile. "Skinwalkers. Drawn to the minerals in these hills, my people have always known to stay away." I laughed nervously. "Skinwalkers? You mean like shapeshifters from legends?" His dark eyes met mine. "Not all legends are made up, Mr. Reynolds. Some are warnings. That night I had the first dream. I was walking through the mine shafts, my lantern casting long shadows. In every crack and crevice of the rock walls, eyes watched me, glowing, patient eyes. I woke up sweating, convinced for a moment that I could still see those eyes gleaming from the dark corners of my bedroom. The next morning, I went back to work, examining geological samples I'd collected. As a scientist, I pride myself on precision and objectivity. But these samples defied explanation. The mineral composition was unlike anything in my textbooks. Even stranger, when I looked away and then back at a sample, subtle properties seemed to have changed. The way light reflected off its surface, the texture, I'm losing my mind, I muttered, rubbing my eyes. That afternoon, I explored more of the abandoned buildings. The miners' quarters told a story the official records didn't mention, a story of fear. Personal items left behind suggested no one planned their departure. Half-eaten meals had fossilized on tables. Valuable watches and family photographs remained in footlockers. Whatever happened here, people left in a hurry, taking only what they could carry. As the sun set on my first week at Rust Creek, I sat on the porch of the foreman's house, watching darkness claim the desert. The silence was absolute. No birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind. Just as I was about to go inside, I heard it clearly for the first time. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. It came from the direction of the sealed mine entrance. I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the sound, my heart pounding. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. At the mine entrance, heavy wooden beams and metal plates blocked the way, secured with chains and padlocks that had rusted solid years ago. No, one could be inside, yet the tapping continued, now with a different pattern. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap. It wasn't random. It felt like communication. Hello? I called, feeling foolish. The tapping stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse somehow, like the entire desert was holding its breath. Then came a sound that turned my blood to ice. Not tapping this time, but a slow scraping like stone, grinding against stone, moving steadily upward from deep within the earth. I ran back to the foreman's house, locked the door, and didn't sleep that night. In the morning light, I told myself I'd imagined it all, the stress of isolation playing tricks on my mind. But as I made coffee with shaking hands, I noticed a fine layer of dust had seeped under my door overnight, forming a perfect circle on the floor. And in the center of that circle was a single, clear footprint, too narrow to be human, with toes that looked more like claws. I knew then that I wasn't alone in Rust Creek, and whatever was with me knew I was there too. I spent the whole next day trying to convince myself the footprint was just my imagination. Maybe I'd made it myself somehow. Maybe it was just dust that happened to look like a footprint. But deep down, I knew better. I avoided the mine entrance after that, focusing instead on my actual job, testing rock samples and writing reports. But the tapping continued every night, always starting at sunset. Sometimes it would go on for hours, changing its pattern but never stopping completely. I started recording the patterns in a notebook, wondering if they meant something. One morning, I set up my seismic equipment to measure underground movement. Normal mines have some settling, small tremors as tunnels slowly collapse over time. But what my equipment showed made no sense. The activity wasn't random. It moved from one shaft to another in specific patterns, almost like something was moving around down there. Impossible, I whispered, watching the needle jump on my machine. The lower levels are sealed, but were they really? I went back through the company records and found maps of the mine's ventilation system. Most of the air shafts had been sealed after the collapse, but the materials listed didn't match standard mining procedures. Instead of wooden beams and metal plates, they'd used some kind of cement mixed with... I squinted at the faded paper. Local mineral compounds and blessed water. What kind of mining company uses blessed water to seal a shaft? During my third week, a dust storm hit. The radio had warned it was coming, so I battened down the windows and doors and waited it out. As sand pelted the windows like tiny bullets, I noticed something odd. This was the night of the full moon, and I remembered the same thing had happened exactly 1 month before when I first arrived. A dust storm on the full moon, like clockwork. When Thomas came to deliver supplies the next day, I asked him about it. The people say that's when they are most active, he said quietly, looking around as if worried about being overheard. They? I asked. Thomas sighed and sat down on my porch step. My grandfather was one of the few who survived what happened here in 32. He never called it a collapse. What did he call it? an awakening. Thomas looked out at the desert. He said the miners dug too deep and woke those who walk between stone, creatures that can become one with the rock and sand. I wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as superstition, but after what I'd seen and heard, "Tell me more," I said instead. "They are ancient, older than humans. They sleep in the deep earth until disturbed. The dust storms hide them when they move. Above ground—" Thomas got up suddenly. "I've said too much. Be careful where you dig, Mr. Reynolds. Some things should stay buried." After he left, I went back to the locked room and searched through more journals. In the oldest one, I found something interesting, a reference to military vehicles arriving just days after the collapse. The foreman had written, "Army says they're here to help with recovery, but they've cordoned off the lower shafts. No mining. Company personnel allowed. What are they looking for down there?" Later entries mentioned classified equipment being brought in, men in strange protective suits entering the mine, and military guards posted around the perimeter. Then the journal. Entries stopped abruptly. That night another dust storm hit. I sat by the window, watching the swirling sand. The visibility was near zero, the air outside a solid wall of flying dirt. Then I saw something that made my heart stop. In the storm, dark shapes moved, human-sized. Figures walked upright through the howling wind, completely unaffected by it. At first I thought they were people, but their movements were too fluid, too graceful for someone fighting against a sandstorm. It was like they were part of the storm itself. One of them turned toward my window, and though I couldn't see a face, I felt it looking right at me. I dropped the curtain and backed away, my heart pounding. The next morning, I found footprints all around the house. Dozens of them, the same narrow, claw-like prints I'd seen before. They circled my home completely, as if whatever made them had been pacing around, looking for a way in. I was running out of rational explanations. Either I was losing my mind, or something impossible was happening at Rust Creek. My research took on a desperate quality after that. I found workers' personal letters that spoke of increasing fear before the collapse. Men fashioning homemade weapons, creating protective charms similar to the symbols I'd found etched on tools. One letter, never sent, read, "If you don't hear from me again, know that it wasn't an accident. They're coming up from below, and the company knows it." A week later, I got an unexpected visitor. A sleek black car drove up to the foreman's house, kicking up dust. A woman in a business suit stepped out, looking completely out of place in the desert ghost town. "Dr. Reynolds? I'm Victoria Harper from corporate headquarters," she said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, her smile professional but cold. "I've come to check on your progress." "The company didn't mention anyone would be visiting," I said, not returning her smile. It was a last-minute decision. "Your preliminary reports have been intriguing." She looked around at my equipment. "Particularly your findings on the unusual, mineral compositions." Something felt off about her interest. The specific minerals she asked about weren't valuable, at least not commercially. Yet she wanted to know everything about them, where exactly I'd found them, how they behaved under different conditions. "These samples were all collected from the surface," I lied. "I haven't been inside the mine." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Of course, the mine remains sealed as per company policy. That night, after Victoria left with promises to return soon, I did something stupid. I decided to find out what was really in those sealed shafts. The main entrance was too secure to breach, but I remembered the ventilation maps. One smaller air shaft on the north side had been marked as partially sealed. It took me hours of searching in the moonlight, but I found it, a narrow opening half hidden by rocks, just wide enough for a man to squeeze through. I should have been scared, but curiosity pushed fear aside. I turned on my headlamp, took a deep breath, and crawled. In the shaft sloped downward, opening into a larger tunnel about 50 feet in. The air was stale but breathable. My light caught the glint of old rail tracks for mining carts, rusted but intact. I followed them deeper. What struck me most was how intact everything was. No cave-in, no collapsed tunnels, just an abandoned mine that looked like the workers had walked out yesterday. And those strange symbols were everywhere, carved into support beams, scratched onto the walls. Protection symbols, getting more numerous the deeper I went. After walking about a quarter mile, I noticed something odd about the side wall of the tunnel. Unlike the rough-hewn rock around it, one section appeared perfectly smooth, like it had been polished. I ran my hand over it. Cool, glassy smooth, impossible to achieve with normal mining tools. Behind me, gravel crunched, like a footstep. I whirled around, my light sweeping the tunnel. Nothing, but in the new silence I could hear it, the now familiar tapping coming from somewhere deeper in the mine. Tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. My heart racing, I followed the sound, moving deeper into the earth. The tunnel opened into a large chamber with several shafts branching off in different directions. And there, in the center of the chamber, was a hole in the floor. Perfectly circular, its edges smooth like the polished wall I'd found. It looked like something had melted through the solid rock. As I approached the hole, the tapping grew louder, now coming from directly below. I knelt and shined my light down, but could see only darkness. I picked up a small rock and dropped it in, counting seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. No sound of impact came back. Outside, the wind picked up suddenly. I could hear it howling through the tunnels, another dust storm coming. And with it, a terrible certainty that I shouldn't be here when it arrived. I ran back the way I'd come, no longer concerned with being quiet. As I neared the entrance, the wind grew louder, sand already beginning to blow into the tunnel. And in that blowing sand, I swear I saw it forming a shape, reaching toward me with long, thin fingers made of swirling dust. I burst out of the shaft into the full force of the storm. Visibility was zero, the air thick with flying sand. I pulled my shirt over my mouth and ran blindly in what I hoped was the direction of the foreman's house. Something moved in the storm beside me, a tall figure keeping pace with me, its body seeming to form and reform out of the swirling sand. I couldn't see a face, just the suggestion of a head and limbs in the pattern of the dust. I ran faster, lungs burning, eyes stinging. The shape stayed with me, sometimes falling behind, sometimes appearing ahead of me, playing with me by some miracle. I found the foreman's house. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, then collapsed on the floor, gasping for breath. When the storm cleared the next morning, I found a message drawn in the dust on my porch. "We see you." I couldn't sleep that night. Those 3 words kept repeating in my mind. We see you. Not I, but we. How many were there? What were they? At dawn, I packed a bag with food, water, and my journal. I couldn't stay in the house anymore. I needed answers, and I knew only one person who might have. Them, Thomas. I hiked 3 miles to where Thomas lived, in a small cabin on the edge of the reservation. When he saw my face, he just nodded like he'd been expecting me. "You've seen them," he said. It wasn't a question. In the dust storm, they were made of sand. Even saying it out loud sounded crazy. Thomas motioned for me to sit on his porch. The old ones called them skinwalkers, but that's just a name for something that doesn't have a name. They've been here since before people. What do they want? To be left alone, to sleep. The miners woke them up. I told Thomas about the message in the dust, about the tapping sounds, about the perfect circular hole in the mine floor. His face grew darker with each detail. "They're more awake than I feared," he said finally. "More active. Something stirred them up." He looked at me hard. "What did you take from the mine?" "Just some rock samples for testing." "And did these rocks change, act strangely?" I thought about the mineral samples that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. Yes, I admitted. They're part of them, Thomas said. The skinwalkers aren't like us. They don't have bodies that stay the same. They can be solid as stone or fine as dust, and anything from deep in that mine has their essence in it. Before I could ask more questions, the rumble of an engine cut through the quiet. A black SUV pulled up beside my truck. Victoria Harper stepped out, now dressed in khaki pants and a button-up shirt, still too clean and pressed for the desert. "Dr. Reynolds," she called. "I've been looking for you." Thomas stood quickly. "Be careful," he whispered to me. "She's not what she seems." Victoria approached with that same cold smile. "I need to speak with you about your findings. Privately." Thomas excused himself and went inside his cabin, but not before giving me a warning look. "You've been busy," Victoria said once we were alone, "breaking into sealed areas of the mine, removing samples without authorization." My stomach dropped. "How did you—" "We monitor the site, Doctor, more closely than you realize." She leaned forward. "Tell me what you saw in the lower shaft." I decided to play dumb. "Just old mining tunnels, nothing special." "Nothing special," she repeated with a small laugh. "No unusual formations, no movements in the walls." The way she said it sent chills down my spine. She knew about them. "Who do you really work for?" I asked. Victoria's smile widened. "Smart man. Not the mining company, not directly. I represent a government research division interested in unique material properties, the kind you've been documenting in your reports." "The military," I said, remembering the journal entries about army vehicles after the collapse. "You've known about whatever's down there since 1932. Known about, studied, and attempted to utilize," she corrected. "The entities you've encountered represent the most significant biological discovery of the century. Organisms that can shift between solid and particulate states at will." "They're not just organisms," I argued. "They're intelligent, they communicate." "All the more valuable," Victoria said dismissively. "Now, I need you to show me exactly where you found the samples with the highest concentration of metamorphic properties." I looked at her carefully. There was something off about her skin, too smooth, almost like sand packed tightly together. And when she moved, fine particles sometimes drifted from her sleeves. With sudden clarity, I realized what Thomas had meant. "You're one of them," I whispered, "or they're inside you." Victoria's smile disappeared. "Not exactly. Let's call it a symbiotic relationship. They've shown me things, Dr. Reynolds. Power you can't imagine." She held out her hand, and I watched in horror as her fingers partially dissolved into swirling sand, then reformed. "We need more of them. The ones we've studied are uncooperative, weakening. We need fresh specimens." I backed away from her. "I won't help you." "I think you will." Victoria looked past me. "Because they're already interested in you." I turned to see what she was looking at and froze. Standing at the edge of Thomas's property was a figure about 7 feet tall, seemingly made entirely of swirling sand and small rocks. It had a vaguely human shape. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, but no facial features, just darker swirls where eyes might be. As I stared, parts of it would become almost solid, then dissolve back into shifting particles. My first real look at a skinwalker. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Victoria said softly. "Completely immune to conventional weapons. Bullets pass right through it. Fire doesn't burn it. It can slip through cracks as fine dust, then reform." The creature took a step toward us, moving with an odd grace. The ground around its feet rippled like water. "It controls earth elements," Victoria continued. "Sand, dust, stone. It can cause targeted cave-ins, create sinkholes under its enemies." "What does it want?" I asked, my mouth dry with fear. "To see what's been taking its minerals," Victoria said. "They're very protective of their resources." The skinwalker was only 10 feet away now. Up close I could see tiny flecks of mica and quartz glittering in its sand body, catching the sunlight. Suddenly, Thomas burst out of his cabin, holding what looked like a water pump sprayer. "Get down!" he shouted, and began spraying the creature with liquid. Wherever the water hit, the skinwalker's body seemed to lose cohesion, the wet sand unable to maintain its form. The creature made a sound like rocks grinding together and backed away. Victoria cursed and reached into her jacket. She pulled out a small device that looked like a modified taser. "That's enough of that," she said, aiming at Thomas. I reacted without thinking, tackling her. The device fired wide, sending out what looked like an electrical charge that hit the ground and somehow solidified the dust there into glass. Thomas kept spraying the skinwalker, which was now retreating rapidly, parts of its body falling away. "Like wet sand. Water disrupts their cohesion," Thomas shouted. "Get in the truck." We ran for my truck while Victoria was still getting to her feet. As we sped away, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw her standing calmly beside the retreating skinwalker, brushing dust from her clothes. "She's like them," I said as we raced down the dusty road. "Not fully," Thomas replied, "but getting there. They can enter humans through the lungs when their dust is inhaled. Over time, they take over. Like possession, more like infection, they change you from inside." Thomas looked grim. "That's what happened to some of the miners. They didn't all die in a collapse. Some became hosts." Thomas directed me to an old hunting cabin deeper in the hills, where he said we'd be safe for a while. As we settled in, he finally told me the full story. "My grandfather was a translator for the mining company," he began. "He was there when they broke through into the lower chamber in 1932. The miners didn't find a new ore vein like they expected. They found a hibernation place, dozens of the creatures dormant in the stone. Some of them fused with the rock walls like they'd been growing there for centuries. And they woke them up," I said. Thomas nodded. "The disruption, the dynamite blasts. The creatures awoke hungry, disoriented. Some miners were killed immediately. Others became hosts when they breathed in the dust. My grandfather escaped with a few others, but not before seeing the company foreman seal the main shaft with explosives. Not to keep people out, I realized. To keep the creatures in. Yes. But the military arrived days later. Instead of permanently sealing the mine, they set up a research facility. They wanted to study the creatures, harness their abilities. For weapons, I said, thinking of Victoria's strange taser. What better weapon than soldiers who could turn to dust, slip behind enemy lines, then reform? Thomas agreed. But they found the creatures difficult to control. Most of the infected hosts eventually went mad or were completely taken over. I thought about Victoria's odd movements, the sand falling from her sleeves. How far gone do you think Victoria is? Far. Enough that she's more their agent than ours, Thomas said grimly. The water buys us time, but we need a better plan. That night, I had another dream, more vivid than before. I was in a vast underground chamber, the walls glittering with strange minerals. Dozens of skinwalkers moved around me, some almost fully solid, others barely more than swirling dust devils. They weren't attacking me, though. They were showing me something. In the center of the chamber was a structure that didn't look natural or man-made. Stone pillars arranged in a circle, covered in symbols similar to the protective markings I'd found on mining tools. An ancient temple, a voice said, though not out loud. I felt the words rather than heard them, like vibrations through the soles of my feet. Built to contain us, to keep us sleeping. I woke with a start, Thomas shaking my shoulder. "They're coming," he said urgently. "Many of them." Outside, a dust storm was brewing, the biggest I'd seen yet. But this one wasn't natural. The clouds of dust moved against the wind, swirling in coordinated patterns toward the cabin. "They're using the dust as eyes," Thomas said, filling our water sprayers. "Watching us." "How did they find us?" Thomas looked at me sadly. "They've been watching you since you arrived, Daniel. The minerals you collected, the air you've breathed, you're connected to them now. They can sense you. As if to confirm his words, I felt an odd buzzing sensation under my skin, growing stronger as the dust clouds approached. Like recognition, like a call. What do we do? I asked, fighting the strange urge to walk out into the storm. We need to reach the original containment site, Thomas said. The temple underneath the mine. My grandfather told me about the old ways to bind them. If we go back to the mine, we'll be walking right into their territory, I protested. It's also where their weakness is, Thomas insisted. The ancient people who built the temple knew how to contain them. We need those secrets. Before I could argue further, something hit the cabin roof hard. Sand poured in through every crack, forming small piles on the floor that began to shift and gather. "They're getting in!" I shouted. The piles of sand rose up, taking humanoid shapes, miniature versions of the skinwalker we'd seen earlier. As they grew larger, pulling more sand in through the windows, I felt that strange buzzing in my veins grow stronger. Thomas sprayed them with water, and they collapsed momentarily, but more sand kept pouring in. "The truck!" Thomas yelled. "We need to go now." We ran outside, using the water sprayers to clear a path through the gathering dust figures. The storm was so thick now, I could barely see the truck just 20 feet away. As we drove blindly through the swirling dust, shapes moved. Alongside us, tall figures running impossibly fast, keeping pace with the truck. One leaped onto the hood, its weight causing the metal to groan. Up close I could see it more clearly, the dark swirls that served as eyes, the way its body constantly shifted between solid and flowing sand. It raised a hand toward the windshield, and I watched in horror as its fingers stretched and sharpened into glass-like spikes, sand superheated into deadly weapons. Thomas swerved hard, throwing the creature off the hood. "They're evolving!" he shouted over the howling wind, "learning new tricks." We raced toward Rust Creek Mine, pursued by a storm that seemed alive with malice. My head pounded with strange rhythms that matched the tapping I'd heard in the mine shafts, like a language trying to push its way into my brain. And somewhere in that noise, a single thought came through clearly. Not my own, but planted there. Come home. Come home. Come home. We reached the mine as night fell. The dust storm still raged around us, but strangely cleared in a perfect circle around the main entrance, like the eye of a hurricane. The heavy boards and chains that had sealed the entrance were torn away, the opening now dark and inviting. "They want us to go in," I said, feeling that strange buzzing under my skin grow stronger. Thomas nodded grimly. "They're gathering, all of them." He handed me a backpack full of water bottles and a sprayer. "Remember, water is our only defense." As we approached the entrance, I noticed something odd about the ground. Perfect circles of glass dotted the sand, like something had melted it from above. "Victoria's been here," I said, remembering the glass-making weapon she'd tried to use on Thomas. "With reinforcements," Thomas added, pointing to fresh tire tracks. "Military, probably." Inside the mine, emergency lights had been set up along the main tunnel, casting long shadows on the rough walls. We followed them deeper, the air growing colder and damper. The buzzing in my veins had become a constant hum now, almost pleasant, welcoming me home. "Can you hear that?" I asked Thomas. "Hear what?" "The singing in the walls." I pressed my palm against the rock face, feeling vibrations that somehow translated into meaning in my mind. They're talking to each other, about us. Thomas looked at me with concern. "You're starting to sense them. It happens to those who've been exposed too long." He grabbed my shoulder. "Stay focused, Daniel. Remember why we're here." We continued down into the mine until we reached the chamber I'd found before. The one with the perfectly circular hole in the floor. Now, the hole glowed with a faint blue light from below. Voices echoed from a side tunnel. Human voices. "We Pressed ourselves against the wall, listening. "We need to secure the primary specimen before the others arrive," a woman said. "Victoria." "This whole place is unstable," a man replied. "These readings are off the charts. We should pull back until we're not leaving without what we came for," Victoria snapped. 20 more minutes, then we can—" Her voice cut off as a low rumble shook the chamber. Dust and small rocks fell from the ceiling. "They're coming up," Thomas whispered. As if answering him, the blue glow from the hole intensified. Motes of glittering dust began rising from it, swirling into the air and gathering into a tall humanoid shape. This skinwalker was different from the others, its body more solid, the sand and mineral particles packed so tightly together that it almost looked like polished stone. And in the center of what would be its chest was a blue crystal, the source of the glow. Victoria and 3 men in military-style gear entered the chamber from the side tunnel. They all carried the glass-making weapons I'd seen before. "There it is," Victoria breathed, her voice full of awe. "The Alpha." The creature turned toward her voice. It had no mouth, but somehow I heard its response in my mind. And from the way Victoria stiffened, she heard it too. "You bring more thieves to our home. We seek to understand you," Victoria said, taking a step forward. "To help you." The creature's head tilted, an eerily human gesture. "Lies, you take. You steal our essence. You break our sleep." While they were distracted, Thomas pulled me toward another tunnel. "This way," he whispered. "We need to find the temple." We crept away from the confrontation, following a smaller tunnel that sloped steeply downward. The walls here were different, smoother, with carvings similar to the protective symbols I'd seen throughout the mine. "These markings are old," Thomas said, running his fingers over them. "From my people, warnings and bindings." The tunnel opened into a vast underground cavern, and there it was, the temple from my dream. Stone pillars arranged in a circle covered in ancient carvings, surrounding a central altar made of a black stone I'd never seen before. The floor around the altar was inlaid with channels that ran to small basins at the base of each pillar. "Water channels," Thomas said, following my gaze. "The old ones knew their weakness." Before we could explore further, the ground shook violently. Dust rained down as the vibrations grew stronger. "They're fighting," I said, somehow knowing it was true. I could feel it. The Alpha Skinwalker facing off against Victoria and her team. We hurried to the altar. Thomas pulled an old leather pouch from his pocket. "My grandfather gave me this before he died. Said I would know when to use it." Inside was a mixture of herbs and minerals. Thomas began sprinkling it into the channels while reciting words in a language I didn't understand. "What are you doing?" I asked. "The old binding ritual. But we need water to activate it, lots of water." I looked around desperately. "Where do we get water in a desert mine?" Thomas pointed to my geological equipment bag. "You have dynamite for taking samples, right?" I nodded, understanding immediately. "The water table. If we blast through the floor in the right spot." "Exactly. But we need to time it perfectly when they're all here." A scream echoed from above, followed by the sound of running footsteps. One of Victoria's men stumbled into the temple chamber, his face streaked with blood. Behind him, sand poured into the room like a living wave, forming into multiple skinwalkers of various sizes. Victoria followed, no longer trying to maintain her human appearance. Parts of her body constantly shifted between flesh and swirling sand, her movements jerky and unnatural. "You," she snarled when she saw us. "You've ruined everything." Behind her came the Alpha Skinwalker, its blue crystal pulsing with light. More of its kind poured into the chamber, surrounding us. In that moment, something strange happened. The buzzing in my veins reached a crescendo, and suddenly I could understand them, all of them. Their thoughts flooded my mind, a chorus of ancient voices, thief, destroyer, awakener. But mixed with their anger was something else, fragments of human consciousness. Memories that weren't mine flashed through my head. Miners working the tunnels, the moment they broke through into the hibernation chamber, the terror as the creatures awoke. And I understood. The Alpha Skinwalker hadn't just killed the missing miners, it had absorbed them. Their consciousness, their memories, now part of its collective mind. "I know what you are," I said to the Alpha. "Your guardians. This place is sacred to you." The creature moved closer, its faceless head tilted. "Toward me, you understand. Others only take. These minerals, they're part of you," I continued. "When humans mine them, they're taking pieces of your kind. Yes, we sleep in the stone. We grow in the earth. This place is ours." Victoria laughed, the sound distorted and inhuman. "Don't waste time talking to it. Their resources, nothing more. Their biological properties will revolutionize warfare." The Alpha turned toward her, the blue crystal in its chest pulsing faster. "You were offered coexistence. You chose theft." Victoria raised her weapon, "And I'd choose it again." She fired at the Alpha, the beam hitting its crystal center. The creature roared, a sound like an avalanche, and the ground beneath us shook violently. "Now!" Thomas shouted to me. "Set the charges!" I worked quickly, placing dynamite where Thomas directed, a spot between two pillars where the bedrock was thinnest. Victoria and the Skinwalkers were locked in battle now, her partially transformed body allowing her to withstand attacks that would kill a normal human. The other soldiers fired their weapons too, turning Skinwalkers to glass when hit directly. But for each one they immobilized, two more poured in from the tunnels. "It's ready," I called to Thomas, connecting the last wire to the detonator. He grabbed my arm and pulled me behind the altar. "When the water comes, run for the upper tunnel. Don't look back." The Alpha Skinwalker had Victoria pinned against a pillar now, its body partially merged with hers as she screamed and fought. I pressed the detonator. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space, rock and dust flying everywhere. For a moment, nothing happened. Then came a sound like thunder as the floor cracked open and water gushed through, an underground river released from its stone prison. The effect on the Skinwalkers was immediate. As water touched them, their bodies began to dissolve, unable to maintain cohesion. They retreated toward the tunnels, but the water moved faster, filling the channels around the altar and flowing outward in all directions. The Alpha released Victoria and turned toward us, its body already beginning to melt at the edges. "You cannot destroy us. Only contain." "I know," I said, feeling a strange sadness. "Go back to sleep. That's all we ask." Thomas pulled me toward the exit tunnel as water continued to pour in. The remaining soldiers were already fleeing, but Victoria stayed, her body now more sand than human, dissolving in the rising water. "This isn't over," she called after us, her voice distorting. "They'll send others." We raced up through the mine as the lower chambers flooded, the water chasing us like a living thing. Behind us, I felt, rather than heard, the Skinwalkers retreating to the deepest parts of the earth, seeking dry stone where they could reform and eventually sleep again. We burst out of the mine entrance just as a rumble shook the entire hillside. The ground collapsed behind us, sealing the entrance more thoroughly than any man-made barrier could. Thomas and I stood in the pre-dawn light, watching as dust settled over the newly formed depression where part of the mine had been. "Is it over?" I asked. "For now," Thomas said, looking out at the desert. "They're contained again, but not destroyed. Nothing that ancient can ever truly be destroyed. And Victoria became too much like them in the end. The water would have dissolved whatever humanity she had left." We walked back to the truck in silence. As the sun rose, I noticed something on my hand, a small patch of skin on my fingertip that looked grainy, almost like sand. When I rubbed it, tiny particles drifted away, catching the light before settling to the ground. I quickly put my hand in my pocket before Thomas could see. 1 year later, the new watcher's cabin sits on a ridge overlooking the collapsed entrance to Rust Creek Mine. I've made it comfortable. Solar panels for electricity, satellite internet for my reports, a good stock of water. The mining company officially abandoned the site after the geological event that closed the main shafts. The military presence disappeared too, though sometimes I spot drones flying over the area, watching, waiting. Thomas visits once a month, bringing supplies and checking the monitoring equipment we've set up. The seismic readings have been quiet. For almost a year now, the skinwalkers sleep once more. I've learned their rhythm, their language of taps and vibrations. Sometimes late at night, I place my palm against the stone floor of the cabin and feel them, faint whispers from deep below, telling their ancient stories, including me in them now. My official job is to monitor for any signs of instability. In the hillside, my real job, the one Thomas's grandfather did before him and countless others before that, is to make sure the skinwalkers stay contained, to perform the small rituals that keep them sleeping peacefully. When I'm alone, I sometimes notice more patches of skin turning grainy, especially when I'm stressed or tired. I can control it now, with concentration. The water helps. Daily showers, staying hydrated. Thomas has taught me exercises, mental barriers to maintain the separation between myself and what now lives inside me. I know I should be afraid of what I'm becoming, but there's a strange comfort in it too, a connection to something ancient and patient, something that thinks in terms of centuries rather than days. As I write in my journal each night, I occasionally notice fine grains of sand falling from my fingertips onto the paper. I brush them away carefully, making sure none remain when Thomas visits. He wouldn't understand. Not yet. The skinwalkers are part of this land. And now, in some small way, they're part of me too. Some nights, when the moon is full and the desert wind blows hot and dry, I step outside and feel the pull, the urge to let my body dissolve into the sand, to dance in the dust devils that spin across the valley floor, to truly become what I've been fighting. So far I've resisted. I'm still more man than mineral. But each full moon, the call grows stronger, and I wonder how long the previous watcher lasted before he answered it. The ND.